And can he give a categorical assurance to the House that there are no plans of any kind to restrain the independence of our central bank?
Well,
can I thank my honourable friend and chair of the Select Committee for his important intervention? I agree with him wholeheartedly. And whilst we do face challenges at the moment, the record of 25 years of central bank independence speaks for itself, with an average inflation rate of exactly 2%. And I know all colleagues will want to make sure that we return to that as swiftly as possible. And I can assure him that is both my and the Governor's ambition.
Randa Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Labour have uncovered £3.5 billion worth of COVID contracts which were awarded to Tory-linked firms. Last week, Dominic Cummings said bunks were paid, with no civil service oversight, to newspapers. Why on earth does the Chancellor think the British public should trust him with the public finances when he manages the economy with the Prime Minister's mantra of one rule for us and one rule for everyone else?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. Obviously, we are all clear that all fraud against the Exchequer is an outrage and totally wrong, and that's why we've established a £100 million taxpayer protection task force, which is precisely determined to focus on this. We've also got a new fraud function within government, which is heavily focused on making sure that we address these issues. Clearly, we are absolutely determined to make sure that where there has been wrongdoing, that we will crack down on it. We will recover the maximum extent of the money that we can. What I would say is, obviously, we had to balance, when introducing these schemes, the imperative for speed of delivery against the risks, and I think we struck the appropriate balance at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There was widespread welcome for the announcement last week that the Government will introduce a Financial Services and Markets Bill. Could my right honourable friend confirm that the intention of that bill is to ensure that future regulation is proportionate, that the regulator is publicly accountable, and that we intend to maintain the international competitiveness of this great industry?
Minister.
Absolutely I can, and I note the observations of some economists yesterday. We will have an obligation on regulators to take account of competitiveness and where we are in the global context.
Alan Brown.
Mr. Speaker, compared to April 2020, our energy bills are now 75% more expensive. Petrol is 50% more expensive. So if the Chancellor thought an extra £20 a week was needed for universal credit 2 years ago, surely it agrees it must be reinstated as a matter of urgency.
Councillor.
Mr. Speaker, of course the Government recognises that energy bills are the single biggest challenge that households are facing, and that's why we have provided £9 billion worth of support, £150 to English councils this most recent month, with £200 more support to come later this year.
Secretary Batty.
You, Mr. Speaker, I believe on this side of the House we are and we ought to be the party of hard-working families. And according to a Centre for Policy Studies report released yesterday, reducing the cost of childcare can increase GDP by 10% and increase access to opportunities for women in the workforce. Does my right honourable friend agree that helping hard-working families with childcare costs is good for the economy and it's the Conservative thing to do?
Yes, sir.
I completely agree with my honourable friend. In fact, we do support families with the cost of childcare. One thing we do is provide families access to tax-free childcare. So that means that you can get a 20% reduction on the cost of childcare up to a cap of £2,000 a year.
All right.
Foreign Secretary is about to make a statement regarding unilateral changes to the Northern Ireland Protocol. This risks unpicking the Trade and Cooperation Agreement and also a trade war with the European Union. I understand that the Chancellor had been a voice for restraint and caution in Cabinet. Why has his view not prevailed?
Minister.
I don't want to foreshadow what the Foreign Secretary may or may not say in the statement that she makes next, but I want to assure the honourable gentleman that with regard to the protocol, the Government's overriding priority has been, and it continues to be, preserving peace and stability in Northern Ireland.
Golden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend confirm that a worker working full-time, 40 hours a week on a living wage is now £1,700 a year better off in real terms than they were in 2010, and after July that will rise to almost £2,000, with everybody earning under £36,000 a year better off under this Conservative government this year?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I thank him for his support in championing policies which support his hard-working constituents. This government is always going to be aside of those people on lower middle incomes who are working hard to provide a better life for their families, Mr. Speaker, and we will keep delivering for them.
Steve McCabe.
The Chancellor called the reduction in fuel duty in the spring statement a tax cut for hard-working families. Why are those families paying more for a litre of petrol today than they were then?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, sadly nothing we can do from this dispatch box can change global oil prices, but what we can do is reduce the taxes that we are responsible for. That tax cut, together with the freeze, is worth about £100 for a typical family driving, £200 or more for a van driver, and almost £1,500 for an HGV driver this year.
Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's not only households that are impacted by the cost of living emergency. Businesses in North Shropshire are facing unimaginable and unmanageable increases in their fuel bills and other input costs, and this has been compounded by the national insurance tax rise imposed by this government and paid by employers. Does the Minister agree, does the Chancellor agree, that the increase in national insurance for employers should be scrapped to keep our small businesses in business?
Well, we are absolutely determined to reduce the burden of tax facing both businesses and individuals. And of course, we've already heard during the course of the exchanges today about the action we're taking, for example, on the employment allowance and on business rates, which is precisely designed to help businesses succeed in what is obviously a challenging environment.
Abdul Khan.
Mr. Speaker, in my constituency of Manchester Gorton, one food bank has provided 1,269 emergency food parcels in 4 months, 40% of which have gone to children. Food banks are now reporting shortages as people cut back to make ends meet. This is no longer about living, it's about surviving. So will the government end their heartless policy and immediately scrap the national insurance hike? Will this government has introduced during the cost of living crisis?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, whether it's expansion of the school breakfast club programme, the holiday activity and food programme, or indeed Healthy Start vouchers, this government is supporting families meeting the cost of food, particularly at this difficult time. He rightly talks about those children growing up in poverty. I'm proud that the best way to support those children is to ensure they do not grow up in a household where no one is working. And thanks to the actions of Conservative governments, 500,000 fewer children are now growing up in a workless household.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One group of companies doing well out of the cost of living crisis are the buy now, pay later lenders, with Klarna now valued at higher than Barclays or Lloyds. 1 in 12 of their customers is using buy now, pay later credit to pay for toiletries and basic food products. Will the Chancellor, who was boasting about our consumer credit profile earlier, name the date when our constituents can finally make good on the promise that was made in this House over 18 months ago to give these people protection from these legal loan sharks and access to the financial ombudsman?
Minister.
I can't give the date, but it will be very soon.
Dan Jarvis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My experience over the past 4 years or so proved without doubt that to truly level up South Yorkshire and the wider North will require transformative levels of investment. Does the Chief Secretary agree with that? And if he does he truly believe that the investment is there to meet the huge challenges that we undoubtedly face?
Minister.
Well, I'd like to start by paying tribute to the honourable gentleman for his service as the Mayor of South Yorkshire. I think he did an outstanding job, and it's very important, I think, that we recognise that we're going to need more great mayors from across this House and from outside Parliament to help deliver opportunity in the regions. We are absolutely clear that our programme of investment, through what is a record spending review, is designed to make sure that levelling up moves from the blueprint to reality over the course of the years ahead.
Idrith.
Mr. Speaker, well, this government has completely failed on growth in the economy. With the IMF taking into account all the current government proposals, currently forecasting the UK will have the slowest growth in the G7 this year. Yeah. But the Minister will also know that putting money into the pockets of the least well-off not only relieves their hardship, but puts it into the local economy as they have to spend it of necessity back into the local economy, thus stimulating growth. So instead of choking off growth with the £20 UC cut, with the NI hike and with the refusal to use a windfall tax to relieve the hardship of those families, what new additional measures does the government propose to help hard-pressed families and to improve that IMF forecast on growth?
Thank you. The Honourable Lady cherry-picks the statistics. Last year we were the fastest growing economy in the G7. This year the second fastest. And after those other countries have caught us up next year, we will return to being the second fastest and the fastest growing economy. And there is more to come from this government to support growth. In the autumn we will cut taxes on business investment and innovation, which we all know is the best way to drive up productivity and growth.
Final question, Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you. Ministers spoke earlier about using infrastructure to level up, and they're absolutely right. We need to link local communities to where the jobs are, so transport matters. Why then is there a lack of joined-up government? The Treasury is paying billions towards HS2 coming to Manchester, and yet the bill before Parliament will sever the Metrolink line through Audenshaw in my constituency to Manchester, meaning that the tram will not be able to run for 2 years. That's not levelling up, is it?
What is levelling up is making sure that we have a colossal programme of transport investment designed to make sure that connections both between regions but within regions are as strong as they possibly can be. And I'd refer to the £96 billion integrated rail plan, which sits at the heart of our ambition in this space. Clearly, on the specifics of the proposal that he mentions, that's something for transport ministers and the Mayor of Greater Manchester to discuss.
The reason I let it run on because we were moving the writs early and we were late starting. Before I call the Secretary of State, I wish to make a short statement in context of this session. I'm exercising the discretion given to the Chair in respect of the resolution on sub judice matters to further extend the waiver granted for proceedings in January to allow full reference to the challenge to the Northern Ireland Protocol and to allow limited reference to the active legal proceedings. I will now call the Secretary of State, Elizabeth Truss. Secretary Truss.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to update the House on the Northern Ireland Protocol and to lay out the next steps. Our first priority is to uphold the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in all its dimensions. That agreement put in place a new arrangement for the governance of Northern Ireland and these islands composed of 3 interlocking strands. A power-sharing government at Stormont on the basis of consent and parity of esteem for all communities. Intensified North-South cooperation on the island of Ireland. And enhanced arrangements for East-West cooperation. So much of the progress that we have seen in Northern Ireland rests on this agreement. And for the agreement to continue to operate successfully, all 3 strands must function successfully. These are the arrangements, are the foundation on which the modern, thriving Northern Ireland is built. It commands the support of parties across this House, and we will continue to work with all communities in Northern Ireland to protect it. As a government, we want to see a First Minister and Deputy First Minister in place, and we want to work with them to make further progress. The basis for successful power sharing remains strong, as my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, laid out yesterday. However, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement is under strain, and regrettably, the Northern Ireland Executive has not been fully functioning since early February. This is because the Northern Ireland Protocol does not have the support necessary in one part of the community in Northern Ireland. I would also note that all of Northern Ireland's political parties agree on the need for changes to the protocol. The practical problems are clear to see. As the House will know, the protocol has not yet been implemented in full due to the operation of grace periods and easements. However, EU customs procedures for moving goods within the UK have already meant companies are facing significant costs and paperwork. Some businesses have stopped trade altogether. These challenges have been sharpened by the post-COVID economic recovery. Rules on taxation mean that citizens in Northern Ireland are unable to benefit fully from the same advantages as the rest of the UK, like the reduction in VAT on solar panels. SPS rules mean that producers face onerous restrictions, including veterinary certification, in order to sell foodstuffs in shops in Northern Ireland. These practical problems have contributed to the sense that the East-West relationship has been undermined. Without resolving these and other issues, we will not be able to re-establish the executive and preserve the hard-won progress sustained by the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. We need to restore the balance in the agreement. Mr. Speaker, our preference is to reach a negotiated outcome with the EU, and we have worked tirelessly to that end and will continue to do so. I have had 6 months of negotiations with Vice President Maros Sefcovic. This follows a year of discussions undertaken by my predecessor. The UK has proposed what we believe to be a comprehensive and reasonable solution to deliver on the objectives of the protocol. This includes a trusted trader scheme to provide the EU with real-time commercial data, giving them confidence that goods intended for Northern Ireland are not entering the EU single market. We're already sharing over 1 million rows of goods movement data with the EU every week. Our proposed solution would meet both our and the EU's original objectives for the protocol. It would address the frictions in East-West trade while protecting the EU single market and the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. The challenge is that this solution requires a change in the protocol itself, as its current drafting prevents it from being implemented. But the EU's mandate does not allow the protocol to be changed. That is why their current proposals are not able to address the fundamental concerns. In fact, it's our assessment that they would go backward from the situation we have today with the standstill. As the Prime Minister said, our shared objective has to be to find a solution that can command the broadest possible cross-community support for years to come and protect the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in all its dimensions. That is why I am announcing our intention to introduce legislation in the coming weeks to make changes in the protocol. Our preference remains a negotiated solution with the EU, and in parallel with the legislation being introduced, we remain open to further talks if we can achieve the same outcome through negotiated settlement. I've invited Vice President Sefcovic to a meeting of the Withdrawal Agreement Joint Committee in London to discuss this as soon as possible. However, to respond to the very grave and serious situation in Northern Ireland, we are clear there is a necessity to act to ensure the institutions can be restored as soon as possible. The Government is clear that proceeding with the bill is consistent with our obligations in international law and in support of our prior obligations in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And before any changes are made, we will consult businesses and people in Northern Ireland as our proposals are put forward. I want to be clear to the House that this is not about scrapping the protocol. Our aim is to deliver on the protocol's objectives. We will cement those provisions which are working in the protocol, including the common travel area, the single electricity market, and North-South cooperation, whilst fixing those elements that aren't, on the movement of goods, goods regulation, VAT, subsidy control and governance. The bill will put in place the necessary measures to lessen the burden on East-West trade and to ensure the people of Northern Ireland are able to access the same benefits as the people of Great Britain. The bill will ensure that goods moving and staying within the UK are freed of unnecessary bureaucracy through our new Green Channel. This respects Northern Ireland's place in the UK, in its customs territory, and protects the UK internal market. At the same time, it ensures that goods destined for the EU undergo the full checks and controls applied under EU law. This will be underpinned by data sharing arrangements that I've already set out. It will allow both East-West trade and the EU single market to be protected, whilst removing customs paperwork for goods remaining in the United Kingdom. The bill will remove regulatory barriers to goods made to UK standards being sold in Northern Ireland. Businesses will be able to choose between meeting UK or EU standards in a new dual regulatory regime. The bill will provide the government with the ability to decide on tax and spend policies across the whole of the United Kingdom. It will address issues related to governance, bringing the protocol in line with international norms. At the same time, it will take new measures to protect the EU single market by implementing robust penalties for those who seek to abuse the new system. And it will continue to ensure there is no hard border on the island of Ireland. I will publish more detail on these solutions in the coming weeks. And let me be crystal clear that even as we do so, we will continue to engage with the EU. The bill will contain an explicit power to give effect to a new revised protocol if we can reach an accommodation that meets our goal of protecting the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. We remain open to a negotiated solution, but the urgency of the situation means we can't afford to delay any longer. The UK has clear responsibilities as the sovereign government of Northern Ireland to ensure parity of esteem and the protection of economic rights. We are clear that the EU will not be negatively impacted in any way, just as we have ensured the protection of the EU single market since the existence of the protocol. We must restore the primacy of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in all of its dimensions as the basis of the restoration of the executive. And we will do so through technical measures designed to achieve the stated objectives of the protocol, tailored to the reality of Northern Ireland. We will do so in a way that fundamentally respects both unions, that of the United Kingdom and of the EU. And we will live up to our commitments to all communities of Northern Ireland. As co-signatory of the co-guarantor of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, we will take the necessary decisions to preserve peace and stability. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Stephen Doherty.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and we're grateful for advance sight of the statement from the Foreign Secretary. And I want to give apologies on behalf of the Shadow Foreign Secretary, who's unfortunately self-isolating due to COVID. It is over 2.5 years since the government negotiated and signed the withdrawal agreement. That deal included the Northern Ireland Protocol, which required, by its design, some trade barriers and checks in the Irish Sea. That was clear from the outset. It was a choice by this Prime Minister, by the government. And yet now, barely 2 years later, the government is trying to convince people its flagship achievement was not a negotiating triumph, but a deal so flawed that they cannot abide by it. Either they did not understand their own agreement, they were not upfront about the reality of it, or they intended to break it all along. The Prime Minister negotiated this deal, signed it, ran an election campaign on it. He must take responsibility for it and make it work. Mr Speaker, the situation in Northern Ireland is incredibly serious. Power sharing has broken down, Stormont is not functioning and political tensions have risen. And people and communities across Northern Ireland face rising bills as the cost of living crisis deepens. The operation of the protocol has created new tensions that do need to be addressed by listening to all sides, to business and to consumers. And both the UK government and the EU need to show willing and good faith. This is not a time for political posturing or high-stakes brinkmanship. Everyone recognises that the situation in Northern Ireland is unique, and we want checks to be reduced to their absolute necessary minimum and for them to properly reflect trade-related risks. It cannot, for example, be right that goods leaving Great Britain that have no realistic prospect of leaving Northern Ireland, like supermarket sandwiches, face excessive burdens, and the EU needs to understand that practical reality. Unnecessary barriers will only hamper business, inhibit trade and undermine confidence and consent. But, Mr Speaker, the Good Friday Agreement was one of the proudest achievements of the last Labour government. It is absolutely essential that it is protected, and that is why we need calm heads and responsible leadership. We need a UK government capable of the hard diplomatic graft to find solutions and an EU willing to show flexibility. But the right response to these challenges cannot simply be to breach our commitments. It is deeply troubling for the Foreign Secretary to be proposing a bill to apparently break the treaty that the government itself signed just 2 years ago. That will not resolve issues in Northern Ireland in the long term. and rather it will undermine trust and make a breakthrough more difficult. It would drive a downward spiral in our relationship with the EU that will have damaging consequences for British businesses and consumers. It's Cornish fishermen, County Down farmers and Scotch whisky makers who will lose out, holding back the economy while growth forecasts are already being revised down. But, Mr. Speaker, this goes beyond matters of trade. Britain should be a country that keeps its word. The rest of the world is looking at us and wondering if we're a country that they want to do business with. When we seek to negotiate new deals abroad, does the government want to make other countries question whether we will keep our end of the bargain? There are wide-ranging and damaging repercussions, undermining our ability to hold others to account for their own commitments, when we should, for example, be pulling together in support of Ukraine, not fuelling divisions with our European allies. Mr. Speaker, the right approach is for the government and the EU to work together to find practical solutions to these problems, to brief the media less and to negotiate more. There is no long-term unilateral solution. Only a solution that works for all sides and delivers for the people and businesses of Northern Ireland will have durability and provide the political stability that businesses crave and the public deserve. And we believe that that should begin with a veterinary agreement that would eliminate the vast majority of checks on produce going from Britain to Northern Ireland. New Zealand, Mr. Speaker, has an equivalence agreement, and it should not be beyond the government and the EU to negotiate one that reflects the unique circumstances in Northern Ireland. And we would also, Mr. Speaker, negotiate with the EU for more flexibility on VAT in Northern Ireland to fully align Northern Ireland VAT rules with those of Great Britain. And we would use that to take VAT off Northern Ireland's energy bills, funded by a one-off windfall tax on oil and gas producer profits, to help ease the cost of living crisis. If the government is determined to plough on with the bill the Foreign Secretary has proposed, will they agree to pre-legislative scrutiny by the Foreign Affairs Select Committee? And will they set out clearly to the House why this doesn't break international law? Mr. Speaker, Labour wants to make Brexit work and for Britain to flourish outside the EU. We want the government... But Mr. Speaker, we want the government to take responsibility for the deal it signed, to negotiate in good faith and to find practical solutions, not take reckless steps to prolong uncertainty in Northern Ireland and damage Britain's reputation. We want the EU to show the necessary flexibility to minimise all barriers and to work with the UK government and listen to all sides in Northern Ireland. That, Mr. Speaker, is the right approach. That is the responsible approach, and it's what is in the long-term interests of the people of Northern Ireland and indeed the whole of the United Kingdom.
Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, our priority has to be, as the United Kingdom government, peace and stability in Northern Ireland and the protection of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. It's vitally important that we get the executive back up and running and functioning, and we fix the very real issues with the Northern Ireland Protocol. I welcome the honourable gentleman's acknowledgement that there are issues with taxation, with customs, with procedures and bureaucracy. In order to fix those issues, it does require the EU to be open to changing the protocol. And as yet, and I've had 6 months of talks with Vice President Šefčovič, my predecessor had 12 months of talks. As yet, the EU have been unwilling to open the protocol. And without that, we cannot deal with the tax issue, we cannot deal with the customs issue, and we will not sort out the fundamental issues in Northern Ireland. And it is our responsibility as the government of the United Kingdom to restore peace, to restore the primacy of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, to get the executive up and running. And in answer to the honourable gentleman's question about legality, we are very clear that this is legal in international law, and we will be setting out our legal position in due course.
Now comes the Chair of the Select Committee, Simon Hall.
The first duty of government is to uphold the law. If it tries to bob and weave and duck around that duty when it's inconvenient, if government does that, then so will the governed. And then nothing is safe, not home, not liberty, not life itself. Not my words, but Margaret Thatcher's. Respect for the rule of law, Mr. Speaker, runs deep in our Tory veins. I find it extraordinary that a Tory government needs to be reminded of that. Could my right honourable friend assure me that support for and honouring of the rule of law is what she and the government is committed to? Yes.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I can assure my honourable friend that we are committed to upholding the rule of law. We are clear that this bill is legal in international law, and we will set out the legal position in due course.
SNP spokesperson Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of her statement. We've heard plenty, I think, about the alleged shortcomings of the protocol, but just to have an acknowledgement of the government's own role in negotiating the protocol, it doesn't even seem to have reached the level of even being limited and specific in what we've heard today. Because ultimately, the problem that this legislation purports to deal with isn't to do with a protocol that was only made necessary by the kind of Brexit the government eventually negotiated. It was the very nature of that settlement that contained the seeds of the problem. Now, I don't deny for one moment, and neither do my colleagues, the hurt and upset caused to many in Northern Ireland by the protocol. But let's not forget that Scotland and Northern Ireland as a whole both voted against Brexit, and there was not cross-union consent for where we are now. And if the consequences of that deal are judged to not be working in the best interests of the people of Northern Ireland, we need, Mr Speaker, to also be honest and recognise that the consequences of the entire withdrawal agreement are not working in the interests of anywhere else in the UK either. Because getting Brexit done has meant creating border checks for goods leaving Great Britain to go to the EU and to go to Northern Ireland, while it's an absolute free-for-all for anything that is coming back into Great Britain. Now, Mr Speaker, we on these benches have said all along that a stable agreement needs to be reached with the EU, which works for all parts of the UK. And I wish the UK government well in that. Genuinely, I do. But with the crisis in Ukraine, the last thing we need to be doing is thrashing around here pointlessly in a snare of our own making. Domestic legislation, even if passed, will not wash away the need to comply with international commitments already made, and neither is it going to change the fact that if the UK is neither in nor aligned with the single market and the customs union, it's still going to create a trade border that needs to go somewhere. Mr Speaker, to restore devolved government in Northern Ireland and to resolve the self-inflicted wounds of Brexit, it's going to need goodwill, trust and a negotiated settlement. I'm sorry to say that the threats of unilateral legislative action by this government to override its own deal are very unlikely to be taken seriously in Belfast. They won't be taken seriously in Brussels. And there's absolutely no reason why it should be taken seriously in this place either.
Foreign Secretary.
I have been very clear that we are open to a negotiated solution, but that negotiated solution needs to deliver on the ground in Northern Ireland and address the very real problems with the protocol, which the honourable gentleman acknowledges, namely the fact that the people of Northern Ireland can't currently benefit from UK tax decisions, state aid decisions, and the fact that there is still full customs implementation on goods coming into Northern Ireland. In order to address those issues, it's not just the implementation of the protocol itself does need to change. And we need that change in the mandate from the EU. But it is absolutely our preference to have a negotiated solution with the EU, but we have to be clear that those changes need to happen. Otherwise, it's simply not going to deliver on the ground in Northern Ireland. It's not going to restore the balance as set out in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and we're not going to see the executive in Northern Ireland back up and running, which is what we want to see.
Theresa Millett.
The protocol is so unreasonable that it's actually banning the movement of tree saplings from Great Britain to Northern Ireland for planting for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. So will the Foreign Secretary promise that her new enhanced Green Channel will not just disapply customs rules, it will also disapply these unreasonable and excessive SPS rules on plant and foods?
Well, my honourable friend is right to point out the very real issues the protocol is causing, particularly on SPS rules, and particularly in respect to goods that are never have any plans to be there aren't plans to transport those goods into the Republic of Ireland. And she is right, our proposals will ensure that those goods are able to travel freely through the Green Lane into Northern Ireland as part of a trusted trader scheme. And any company violating that scheme and not following the rules, there will be enforcement to make sure we protect the EU single market. This is a pragmatic solution. We are supplying commercial data to the EU. We are supplying it in real time so that they are able to manage the EU single market at the same time as protecting our UK single market.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Speaker, I agree that the Commission needs to move further to reduce unnecessary checks and paperwork on goods moving between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. A sandwich made in Yorkshire, sold in Belfast, presents no threat whatsoever to the integrity of the European Union single market. But why does the Foreign Secretary think that threatening unilaterally to change an international treaty, and I look forward to seeing the description of why that is legal, is going to help encourage the Commission to change its approach, especially when it's likely to undermine trust further and may result in trade retaliation, which is not in the interest of any of our constituents, is it?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, the honourable gentleman points out that we do need to see more flexibility from the EU, and we do need to see a changed mandate, because the point he was making about sandwiches from Yorkshire, that cannot be addressed within the operation of the protocol. The protocol itself needs to be changed. And I've had 6 months of discussions with Maros Sefcovic. My predecessor had a year of discussions, and there still has not been an agreement from the EU to change the protocol itself, which would fix the issues the honourable gentleman has raised. So we are in a position now where we have seen the Belfast Good Friday Agreement undermined. We've seen the balance upset in Northern Ireland. We haven't seen the executive established since February. So in the absence of being able to achieve a negotiated solution with the EU, this is why we are bringing forward legislation. But I'm very clear, I would very much be hopeful that the EU will change their position, that they are prepared to enter negotiations on that basis to fix the very real issues the honourable gentleman mentions. On the point about the response from the EU, I would point out that our solution makes the EU no worse off. You know, we have proposals to protect the single market, to make sure that there is enforcement of the green lane and the red lane. So I would hope that they look at our proposals in a reasonable way, as we are putting them forward in a reasonable way, and that we can work together on a solution.
Sir William Cash.
May I commend my right honourable friend for her excellent statement, and my right honourable friend the Prime Minister on Section 38 of the Withdrawal Agreement Act 2020, which enables her bill to use our sovereignty, notwithstanding the protocol. Will she also ensure by instructions to Parliamentary Council that the bill fully satisfies our sovereignty and the constitutional integrity of Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom and the Good Friday Agreement, and that the European Court and EU law do not displace UK law, and I urge her to strongly take the advice of the Attorney General on matters of international law, despite siren voices to the contrary.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his great expertise in this matter. And just to be clear, on the subject of the ECJ, our solution is to have an arbitration mechanism in place, like we have in the TCA, rather than having the ECJ as the final arbiter.
Sir Geoffrey Donalds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From the outset in this House, the DUP warned about the consequences of this protocol, and that's why we opposed it from the beginning, because we recognised the political and economic instability it would cause and the harm it would create for the Union itself. The statement today is a welcome, if overdue, step. That is a significant move towards addressing the problems created by the protocol and getting power sharing based upon a cross-community consensus up and running again. Therefore, we hope to see progress on a bill in order to deal with these matters in days and weeks, not months, and as the legislation progresses, we will take a graduated and cautious approach. We want to see the Irish Sea border removed, and the Government honouring its commitment in the New Decade New Approach Agreement to protect Northern Ireland's place in the UK internal market. The statement today indicates this will be covered in the legislation to bring about new revised arrangements. Under the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, power sharing can only be stable if consensus exists on a cross-community basis. It does not exist at the moment on the part of the unionist community. We want to see the political institutions properly functioning as soon as possible. But to restore unionist confidence, decisive action is now needed in the form of legislation to repair the harm done by the protocol to the acts of union and to put in place sensible arrangements that, in the words of the Queen's speech, ensure the continued success and integrity of the whole of the United Kingdom, including the internal economic bonds between all its parts. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the words today are a good start, but the Foreign Secretary will know that it is actions that speak louder than words. And I welcome her commitment to such decisive action in this statement to the House.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman. What everybody in Northern Ireland agrees on, all parties, is that the Northern Ireland Protocol is not working. And we don't have cross-party consent to move forward. I think it's vitally important to restore the primacy of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which provided for power sharing in Northern Ireland to ensure we have the consent of all communities. And it is the government's priority, above all else, to make sure that we protect peace and stability in Northern Ireland. That is our first duty as the sovereign government of the United Kingdom.
Chris Grayling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We hear a lot in today's discussion about the legal position of the United Kingdom. But it seems to me, having read the protocol very carefully, that there's a very real question mark about the legal position of the European Union, because the protocol contains a lot of caveats around the protection of community relations in Northern Ireland, none of which appear to be being fulfilled at the moment. So will she ensure that she takes proper legal advice about their position, and we don't just listen to all the comments about our position?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, my right honourable friend makes an important point. The issue with the protocol is that we have found, despite entering the protocol in good faith, that it has not operated as we foresaw. And it is causing the very real problems that we see in Northern Ireland today. This is why our number one priority is to seek a negotiated solution with the EU. But in the absence of that, option being available, it is why it is so important we act now to restore the primacy of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, to restore the balance in Northern Ireland, and to make sure all communities in Northern Ireland are treated with esteem.
Ben Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Why should the hard-pressed public of the United Kingdom, facing an unprecedented cost of living crisis, pay even higher prices as a result of a trade war caught with our main trading partners, because she and the DUP want to tear up the agreement the Prime Minister negotiated and she voted for?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very clear that our priority is seeking a negotiated solution with the EU, and none of the proposals that I have put forward today make the EU any worse off. We want a solution that works for the EU single market and also works for the UK single market. But the reality is the people of Northern Ireland are paying higher prices as a result of the operation of the protocol. So, for example, the Road Haulage Association says that the protocol has caused a 34% increase in the cost of moving goods to Northern Ireland. So we are facing a real cost of living impact in Northern Ireland. What we want to do is fix the protocol to the benefit of both the United Kingdom and the European Union.
Robert Betland.
you, Mr. Speaker. Article 1 of the protocol makes it very clear that that agreement is to be without prejudice to the Good Friday Belfast Agreement regarding the constitutional status of Northern Ireland. That means surely that the Good Friday Agreement takes primacy over the protocol. And if that is right, what evidence will my right honourable friend bring forward to make it very clear that it is necessary for change if we were to avoid a degradation or a degrading in the constitutional order and order generally in Northern Ireland?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, my right honourable friend makes a very important point about the primacy of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which has been vital for peace and stability in Northern Ireland, and it is our priority to restore that. And as I've said, we will set out our legal position in due course.
Colin Eastwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What we've heard from this government today is absolutely astonishing. So this morning, the government announced that they're going to ride roughshod over the wishes of victims in Northern Ireland by ripping up an international agreement called the Stormont House Agreement. Now the Foreign Secretary has confirmed that she's going to go against the majority, despite what she might say, the majority of citizens in Northern Ireland who support the protocol by ripping up an international agreement called the Withdrawal Agreement. Mr. Speaker, it's a very, very simple question. Despite what some people, they might not want to listen to the majority of people in Northern Ireland. It's a very simple question. How can any international partner or how can any citizen in the north of Ireland ever trust this government again?
Foreign Secretary.
In response to the honourable gentleman, an overwhelming proportion of people in Northern Ireland, 78%, agreed that the protocol needs to change in polling conducted in December 2021. So it's simply not true to say a majority of people in Northern Ireland support the protocol. And as the honourable gentleman knows, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement is based on power sharing, it's based on esteem for all communities. And what we want to find, ideally with the EU, is a solution that works for all the communities in Northern Ireland.
Sir Oliver Hill.
The UK-EU Parliamentary Partnership Assembly met for the first time in Brussels last Thursday, and we had the opportunity of a lively encounter between the Paymaster General and Commissioner Šefčovič. But members were able to ask about the sort of points that have been discussed today. And it was clear from Commissioner Šefčovič that he believed there was a landing place for an agreement on these difficult matters. And so could I just urge my right honourable friend to go the extra mile and see if we can get an agreement? Because if we could, it would open up all the other opportunities for cooperation in energy, science and so many other things.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I can assure my honourable friend that that is absolutely what I want to do. I spoke to Commissioner Šefčovič last night. I want to see a meeting immediately of the Joint Committee to discuss this, but it will require to fix these very real issues in Northern Ireland, particularly on areas like customs and tax, where some of these points are baked into the protocol. In order to change the situation on the ground in Northern Ireland, we do need changes to the protocol, and that is the issue that as yet, and I have had numerous discussions with Maros Šefčovič about this, as yet there isn't agreement for his mandate to change, to include changes to the protocol. So that is the fundamental issue we're facing, but I am very, very willing to have those discussions. I'm seeing the Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney later this week to have further discussions with him. We're very open to resolving these issues between the UK and the EU, but we do need a real acknowledgement of what is happening on the ground in Northern Ireland and the fact that the protocol does need to change.
Fleur Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So much for getting Brexit done, so much for oven ready. What is the cost of the proposed actions? The Treasury has drawn up economic impact assessments for this course of action. When will the government release them for the House?
Well, the solution that we are putting forward will actually save costs by reducing the bureaucracy that traders are currently facing shipping goods into Northern Ireland. So our overall proposal benefits traders into Northern Ireland, it benefits the people of Northern Ireland, it doesn't make the EU any worse off, and it helps protect the single market.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I warmly welcome this statement, as I am sure will the Nobel laureate Lord Trimble, who wrote in the national newspaper this morning it was urgent to address the problems of the protocol. As an architect of it with John Hume nearly a quarter of a century ago, he also raised the issue of the adverse influence of the European Court of Justice in Northern Ireland. So can the Foreign Secretary assure the House that under her sixth heading, which I think she called governance, she will take action on that issue as well, please?
Foreign Secretary.
I can assure my honourable friend that we will take action to ensure the arbitration mechanism is in place for Northern Ireland as it is in the TCA, rather than having the ECJ as the final arbiter, which it is as present. And he is right to highlight the article today by Lord Trimble. We need to go back to the original thinking behind the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which was about treating the communities of Northern Ireland with equal esteem to make sure that we have successful arrangements in place to protect peace and political stability, and that has to be this government's priority.
Stephen Farry.
Thank you. The protocol represents Northern Ireland's soft landing from this government's decision to have a hard Brexit. And let me be very, very clear. There is a majority of voters in Northern Ireland, MLAs and the business community, who want to see the issues with the protocol addressed in a pragmatic way through building trust and partnership with the European Union, not through damaging unilateral action, which will damage the UK's international reputation, including with the United States. And specifically on the issue of the European Court of Justice, does the Foreign Secretary understand that if she tinkers with that jurisdiction, that will force Northern Ireland out of the single market for goods and undermine Northern Ireland's ability to attract investment in terms of our dual access to both the European Union and Great Britain?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, what we're proposing for Northern Ireland is a dual regulatory system that encompasses either EU or UK regulation as those businesses choose, that reflects its unique status of having a close relationship with the EU whilst being part of the UK single market.
Duncan Smith.
Welcome my right honourable friend's statement. The powerful article that was referred to by Lord Trimble, one of the architects of the Good Friday Agreement, makes it very clear that the maintenance of the Good Friday Agreement overcomes everything else. And so to that extent, it would be helpful if those who bang on about this at the moment on the other side to know if they read the protocol, Article 13.8 makes it absolutely clear that the protocol can be, through negotiation, changed in whole or in part. Now, the point here is, therefore, my right honourable friend is quite correct. The EU now needs to step up to their responsibilities in that protocol and do what 13.8 tells them to do.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, my right honourable friend is right. The protocol was never designed to be set in stone. And what we have seen is the very real consequences of the protocol, which has not yet been fully implemented on the ground in Northern Ireland. And it has caused political instability. It has caused imbalance in the relationship between the communities in Northern Ireland. And we do need to fix that. And my strong preference is for the EU to secure a change in mandate so we can find a negotiated settlement. I completely agree with Commissioner Šefčovič. There is a landing zone to be had. But what we do need to see is that flexibility so we can really make sure there's a proper green channel operating into Northern Ireland, that we can ensure the people of Northern Ireland are benefiting from the same tax benefits as the people of Great Britain, and so we can fix those problems in a sustainable way.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. With a cost of living crisis and rising tension in Northern Ireland, the last thing our country needs is a poisonous standoff with the EU and the prospect of a trade deal with our largest trading partner. But until recently, the Prime Minister himself was saying, don't worry, it's all okay, there will be no border down the Irish Sea, and ministers were incredulously parroting the lines that we will only break international law in a limited and specific way. So does the Foreign Secretary agree that it is the pinnacle of incompetence or deceit for someone to negotiate and sign a deal when they have no intention whatsoever of honouring that deal?
Foreign Secretary.
As I've said, our priority is securing peace and stability in Northern Ireland and restoring the primacy of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. The protocol was agreed in good faith, but it has had unintended consequences, and it is the responsibility of the United Kingdom government to take action to restore the balance. Our preference is a negotiated solution with the EU. We think there is a landing zone to achieve that, but it does require the EU to change its mandate.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Can I just point out to my right hand friend that I only reluctantly voted for the protocol and the withdrawal agreement on the basis that we weren't allowed to conclude a permanent trading agreement with the EU until we left, and that it would be superseded or overtaken in due course. Can I also just point out, apart from the disagreement about whether we should have legislation, there seems to be very broad agreement across this House, as there was when I proposed a motion to this House on the 15th of July last year, which the Labour Party actually supported with very warm words, saying there were legitimate concerns amongst the unionist community that had to be addressed. It's a shame the Labour Party won't will the means as well as the ends, but can I invite her to engage the reasonable elements of the Labour Party to support her negotiating position so that we can reach a negotiated settlement?
Foreign Secretary.
I am very happy to engage with colleagues across the House, in particular to explain the issue of why there needs to be a change in the protocol itself to fix the issues about making a clear green lane between GB and Northern Ireland and resolving these taxation issues. Because that is the fundamental issue with the negotiations with the EU, which we have conducted in good faith. I've had numerous negotiations and conversations with Commissioner Šefčovič over the past 6 months, but fundamentally the EU's mandate does not allow those changes to be made that would help us create the green lane, to create the free flow of goods between GB and Northern Ireland, and also address this unfairness in the tax system, where the Chancellor announces a cut to the VAT on solar panels, but that can't be implemented for the people of Northern Ireland.
Leila Moran.
Mr. Speaker, however, she may dress this up. Unilaterally changing a previously agreed international treaty is breaking it. And it is doublespeak to suggest otherwise. The consequences are real. Ordinary families up and down this country will have higher prices to pay because of a trade war. So could she take this opportunity to be honest with the British people? If we get to the point where tariffs are raised as a result of a trade war with the EU, how much will they have to pay? Or does she not care?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, we're very clear that this bill is legal in international law, and as I've said, we will set out our legal position in due course. Our proposals, which we'll be outlining in more detail over the coming weeks, are very clear about how we protect the EU single market. Currently, businesses in Northern Ireland and Great Britain are facing increased costs as a result of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Our proposals would deal with those costs whilst protecting the EU single market. The EU will be no worse off as a result of our proposals.
Scott Mann.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is genuine anger in the Loyalist community about the protocol and the way in which many people feel it undermines their British identity. Now that it has been unanimously rejected at the ballot box by the Unionist community, what assurances can my right honourable friend give me that if the negotiations continue to fail, we will see a bill over the coming days and weeks, not months, in this House?
Foreign Secretary.
We're committed to introducing a bill to resolve the very real issues on the ground in Northern Ireland. In parallel, we are open to negotiations with the EU, but in order to proceed on those negotiations, the EU do have to be willing to change the protocol itself to fix those very real issues.
Paul Blomfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary knows that there were only 3 ways of protecting Northern Ireland's special position after Brexit: a land border on the island of Ireland, which we all reject; closer alignment between the UK and the EU, which business wanted but the government rejected; and a sea border. The Prime Minister chose a sea border. He knew the checks it would involve, but he denied it to the unionist community. Now, there are solutions which can be negotiated, but isn't the reason for today's statement that the government and the Foreign Secretary, for reasons of her own ambition, see advantage in fuelling Brexit divisions?
Foreign Secretary.
I don't agree with the honourable gentleman's analysis. There is a solution, and we have put it forward to the EU, of using commercial data that is collected in the normal course of business, sharing that in real time with the EU, making sure there are strong protections on the trusted trader scheme so that any untoward activities are acted against. We can do all of that and make that happen and protect the EU single market, whilst at the same time enabling the free flow of trade. What we need, though, is we need flexibility in the EU's mandate so they are prepared to change the protocol. And as many people in this House have already said, the protocol was never intended to be set in stone. But it is our duty as the United Kingdom government to act to restore peace and stability in Northern Ireland.
Okay, you're right, Rosa. Thank you. Thanks, Rosa. All right.
Were great. The thing which made it only tolerable was that we knew this was unfinished business. Today we face just the problems which the protocol itself foresaw. The protocol, of course, as my right honourable friend has said, has provision for it to be changed. Can I just invite her, as I welcome this, the right solution for the way forward, and what nonsense we've heard. This is a solution that could be negotiated. As I welcome it, could I just ask her to repeat once again that we will protect the EU's legitimate interests as we restore the primacy of the Good Friday Agreement and the constitutional integrity of the UK?
Foreign Secretary. Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. We've already established the trusted trader scheme. We've already established data sharing with the EU of commercial data. What we're proposing as part of this bill is proper enforcement to make sure the EU single market is protected. That is the best solution, in our view, that makes sure there is free flow of trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, whilst at the same time protecting the EU single market. I think we have heard across the House today that people recognise there are real issues with the Northern Ireland Protocol. My number one preference is to get a negotiated solution with the EU, but they do have to be willing to look at these type of pragmatic solutions that will both protect the EU single market, but also the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the United Kingdom.
Ian Paisley.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Foreign Secretary must be alarmed at the comments that emerged this morning from the Chairman of Marks and Spencer. Already he's had to close his business in France. His business in the Republic of Ireland is about to close. Oh, he's a Conservative, therefore he should not be doing business. That seems to be the Liberal view emerging. His business in the Republic of Ireland to export goods has to fill in 700 pages. It has to do that within an 8-hour period. It has to do some of that wording in Latin to satisfy the European community. And it also has to do it in a certain type font, or else it will not be allowed. It costs him an additional £30 million. He has said this morning on the radio that the EU has told him that they would like the same procedures for his businesses in Northern Ireland. This is a power grab. People talk about a trade war. This is a trade war to crush business in Northern Ireland. Will the Foreign Secretary ensure that whenever she's speaking to the Cabinet, that they know clearly that if they keep the protocol, power sharing isn't coming back.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I've been very clear in my statement, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we are bringing forward legislation to sort this issue out and to deal with the bureaucracy that we're seeing, the requirement for customs declarations, customs codes from businesses who are simply operating within the United Kingdom. That is why we want to create the green lane that allows properly protected goods to be freely move within the United Kingdom, and we're committed to that legislation. Now, if in the meantime, in parallel, the EU are prepared to move to a negotiated settlement to resolve the very issues the Honourable Gentleman is raising, of course we are open to those talks, but we will not allow it to delay us taking the action we need to take to restore the primacy of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee under my chairmanship produced a comprehensive set of alternative arrangements that were workable and high-tech that would erase the need for the current perniciously applied checks that most in this House agree are unnecessary. Given that they would satisfy the stated objections of the European Union, why does she think they have been stonewalled by the EU?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm not going to speculate as to why the EU has not changed its negotiating mandate, but I think it is very clear that there is a solution here. And my honourable friend worked very hard on this. There is a solution here that both satisfies the requirement to protect the EU single market, at the same time restores the primacy of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And we need to make sure we're moving forward as fast as we can to that solution.
Stephen Timms.
Speaker, to make his EU deal work, the Prime Minister inserted a border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Some accepted the absurd claim that there would not be any checks across that border. That misjudgment has proved electorally disastrous and potentially fatal to the Union. Today, the Foreign Secretary has announced that the government may well breach the agreement the Prime Minister negotiated. What assessment has she made of the impact of that announcement on trade negotiations underway with other countries around the world?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, there are very real issues, as we've heard today from all sides of the House, about the way the Northern Ireland Protocol is working, and we do need to fix the Northern Ireland Protocol. Our preference is for a negotiated solution, but if that is not possible, we are putting legislation through the House of Commons and through Parliament. And as I've already said in this statement, we are clear that this bill is legal in international law. So there is no question of violating international law.
Damien Green.
Deputy Speaker, depending on which newspaper I've read over the past 2 days, I could understand either that the government wants to tear up the protocol altogether, or that it sees this proposal as an insurance policy while negotiations continue. My right honourable friend this morning has been clear that the latter interpretation would be correct. Can I welcome that very much? And can I ask her also to try to ensure some consistency in government messaging while the negotiations are going on, that actually a negotiated settlement would be preferable?
Foreign Secretary.
There are some things that are within my power and there's some things that aren't. And controlling what the British media prints is simply not within my power. We are very clear, we're not about scrapping the protocol, we're not about tearing up the protocol. What we want is to change the protocol, ideally working with the European Union, but the mandate does have to change in order to get the changes on the ground that we need to see. But in the absence of that, the legislation will ensure that those changes are made. And as I say, there's provision specifically in the legislation to implement a negotiated solution. I was very clear about that in my statement.
Joanna Cherry.
Mr. Speaker, last week it was reported that the Attorney General has provided legal advice as a background to this bill, and I have no doubt that will be based on her views on parliamentary sovereignty and the supremacy of domestic law, which she's previously favoured this chamber with the last time they were planning on breaking international law. Now, the Honourable Member for Stone, says that we should ignore, and I quote, siren voices to the contrary. The difficulty for the Foreign Secretary, the Attorney General and the Honourable Member for Stone is that the siren voices to the contrary include the United Kingdom Supreme Court. Yes. Has the Foreign Secretary read paragraph 55 of the judgment in the first Miller case, that's the case about triggering Article 50, in which the Supreme Court are quite clear that international treaties signed by the UK government are binding upon the UK in terms of international law, and as such, our obligations under them cannot be unilaterally rewritten. Is she aware of that?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, we fully respect the rule of law, and we're very clear that this bill is in line with international law.
Order. I do realise the importance of this statement, and but I would inform members that we do have a very well subscribed debate afterwards as well. So if we could have quite brief questions, I think that would be helpful. Sir Desmond Swain.
What is absolutely clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that those honourable members seeking to undermine the government's negotiating position haven't emerged from the trenches they dug themselves in the last Parliament, have they?
Yes. Foreign Secretary.
Well, what I do think we have heard today is that all sides of the House agree there is a real problem with the way the Northern Ireland Protocol is operating, and it needs to be solved. And I hear people saying that we want to get an agreed solution with the EU. I hope the EU will change their negotiating mandate so we are able to achieve that.
Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. She made it clear that one of the primary reasons for acting the way she is today is to try and get the executive back up and running in Northern Ireland. But she also said in her statement that the bill, and I quote, ensures that goods destined for the EU undergo full checks and controls. So there will still be checks. So on that basis, has she received an assurance from the DUP that even with these continued checks, they will agree to re-enter the executive?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I've been clear that our #1 priority is restoring the balance in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which has been undermined by the operation of the protocol. And what we're proposing, and I will be bringing out more details of this in due course, is a green lane of trusted traders that's properly protected for goods into Northern Ireland, and a red lane for those goods that have to go through the full customs controls into the EU single market. And I'm very clear that part of our agreement, as well as protection of the UK single market, is the protection of the EU single market.
Rod Neil.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I particularly welcome the Foreign Secretary's repeated insistence it's our intention to seek a negotiated settlement. And echoing the words of my right honourable friend, the member for Hertfordshire North East, can I urge that is important, not just in terms of the overall objective, but also in terms of the United Kingdom's international reputation, and also to demonstrate that we act with the greatest concern for our legal obligations. Would you perhaps consider in due course making available the draft of any proposed legislation, so that those who wish to work constructively with the government to make sure we do this lawfully can perhaps test the proportionality of those measures against the objectives and against the legal advice which I know she has already received?
Foreign Secretary.
As I've said, our priority is to secure a negotiated solution. It will require the EU changing its mandate, and I do hope that following today's statement and the comments by people right across this House, that we will see some more flexibility from the EU. And we are committed to acting in line with international law. We're very clear about that. We'll set out our legal position in due course. I'm very happy to have more discussions with my honourable friend about the precise contents of the bill.
Campbell.
The State referenced the issue of the need to ensure no hard border on the island of Ireland. Would you accept from me that there's no possibility that that could happen? It's simply not practical, not possible, there's no political consent for it, and would be easily avoided if it were to come about. So that is a nonsense that needs to be dismissed. But in terms of the cross-community consensus, can she assure the House and the people of Northern Ireland that her bill will be placed before Parliament, before the summer recess, in order for people to see what progress has been made practically rather than the words?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm very clear that we will be bringing the bill out in the coming weeks. That is an important priority for this government, and we understand that we cannot see any more delay. We've already had 18 months of negotiations with the EU on this issue. Regrettably, we're not yet in a position where the EU is willing to consider changing the protocol. That is why we are obliged to take forward the bill. During that time, as I've been very clear, we remain open to negotiations, provided there is a willingness to address the real issues on the ground in Northern Ireland.
Peter Bone.
Madam Deputy Speaker, you will remember the years, I think it was, of negotiating to try and withdraw from the European Union under the previous Prime Minister. And it was dragged out and dragged out by the European Union. It was only when we had the new Prime Minister who was going to act decisively that we got the withdrawal from the EU, we got a free trade agreement without any quotas. So may I suggest to the Foreign Secretary, Madam Deputy Speaker, that she should publish this bill straight away and get on with it, because the only way you're going to get the EU to come to the negotiation table and really negotiate with you is if you threaten them with that bill. So can she be more precise exactly when that bill's coming in? Is it next week or the week after?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I agree with my honourable friend. It is urgent that we act, and I can assure my honourable friend that this bill is coming in the following weeks.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The businesses and communities dealing with the consequences of Brexit need honesty and certainty, not the chaos and confusion of a potential trade war. So can the Foreign Secretary reassure them? She's repeatedly today said that what she intends to do is in line with international law and talked about the TCA. I know she won't publish as yet the legal advice, but can she tell us which international laws she intends to abide by, what the adjudication mechanism might be, and whether the EU has agreed to it?
Well, as I've made clear, our proposals are legal in international law, and we'll set out the legal position in due course.
Dave Jones.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Foreign Secretary has put forward sensible and practical proposals for protecting the integrity of the EU single market. Those could be quite easily reciprocated by the European Union. Could my right honourable friend say, if she has put these proposals to Mr Šefčovič, what has been his response, and if he has refused to accept them, what reason has he given?
Foreign Secretary.
I have put these proposals to Vice President Šefčovič, and we have had extensive discussions about how we make sure that both the UK single market and the EU single market has been protected. The issue for the European Commission in terms of accepting our proposals is that his mandate does not extend to changing the protocol, and he is therefore unable to accept the proposals on that basis.
Drew Hendry.
Madam Speaker, what the Foreign Secretary and our government is proposing here today will impact on all of our constituents. So can she explain to the people of Inverness, Nairn, Badenoch and Strathspey how unilaterally breaking an international treaty and potentially sparking a trade war will help them with the price increases they're facing at the moment of £20 a week on their average weekly shop?
Foreign Secretary.
Our priority in putting forward this legislation is to protect the hard-won peace and stability inherent in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And that is our priority, and that is why we are taking this bill forward. But we're very clear that in our proposals that protect the EU single market, that make sure there is no irregular activity, that the EU are no worse off as a result of the proposals.
Kelly Tolhurst. Speaker, and I welcome my right honourable friend's statement this morning. Sadly, last week at the UK-EU Parliamentary, the Vice President, Sefcovic, used language which I found to be incredibly disappointing in relation to the UK. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that it is also incumbent on the EU to enter into sensible negotiations with the United Kingdom in order to find practical and deliverable solutions for the real problems that the people of Northern Ireland are facing? Because it's incumbent on us and the EU to work together to deliver for the people of Northern Ireland.
Foreign Secretary. We've engaged in negotiations with the EU in good faith. We do want to achieve the practical solution in all of the areas I laid out, including on customs, including on taxation, including on governance. But fundamentally, that does require a new mandate so that we can see the increased flexibility that is going to deliver for the people of Northern Ireland.
Sammy Wilson.
I first of all welcome the commitment which the Foreign Secretary has made to addressing this issue. But could I urge her not to give in to those who shamelessly today in this House have almost urged the EU to engage in a trade war with the UK, and have also urged her to dismiss the views of the majority unionist community, contrary to the Good Friday Agreement, and also have ignored the fact that the EU has not acted in good faith and lived up to its commitments to seek alternative arrangements to the Northern Ireland Protocol. But does she realise that, given broken promises in the past, we can only judge what has been said today when we actually see a bill progressing through this House with the terms in that bill outlining the points which she has made?
Foreign Secretary.
We are committed to bringing forward legislation to deal with this very real issue that is upsetting the balance of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. That is why I'm making this statement today. That is why we are clear that we need to act.
Marcus Fish.
Deputy Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree with me that the priority that she's given to the Belfast Agreement is correct, but also that the reasonable evolution that she is putting forward to the protocol is something that not only wouldn't make the EU worse off, it's actually better in terms of border arrangements than they have, for example, on their eastern flank with trade with Belarus here?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point that the proposals that we are putting forward secure the single market. They share the data which we're already doing on commercial data about goods crossing the Irish Sea, as well as having very strong enforcement provisions that compare very favourably with other customs arrangements around the world.
Stephen Kinnett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A veterinary agreement would remove the vast majority of barriers to trade between GB and Northern Ireland. It's widely supported by farmers, fishermen, by the 5 parties in Northern Ireland, by the European Union, by the United States government. Can the Foreign Secretary please explain why she has failed to agree a veterinary agreement with the European Union? That is surely the pragmatic solution she keeps saying that she wants to have.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, there are various issues in the protocol that are preventing the free flow of trade between GB and Northern Ireland, including customs codes as well. And what I want is a comprehensive solution that creates a green channel that shares that commercial data.
Andrew Bowie.
Absolutely. International
agreements are renegotiated and reopened all the time. Indeed, the European Union is a persistent and repeat renegotiator of international agreements, so much so it was written into the protocol that this could be renegotiated. And whilst I also heard Mario Sefcovic say last week we could get to a landing zone on this, it's quite clear that the EU's overzealous interpretation of some elements of the protocol and his lack of mandate to get us there is preventing us making our way to that landing ground. So does she agree with me that the legislation that she is proposing is the only way that we can ensure the primacy of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and the integrity of our United Kingdom?
Foreign Secretary.
The proposals we're putting forward that deal with the customs bureaucracy, that deal with the tax inequality, are ultimately the solution that we need to deliver. Now, if the EU has a new mandate that is prepared to look at those things, there is a landing zone with the EU. I'm very clear about that. But in the absence of that new mandate, we have to act, because this is about protecting the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. It's about protecting the balance between the communities in Northern Ireland. That's ultimately about protecting the entire United Kingdom.
Amy Callan.
The Prime Minister told this House in 2019 that the protocol he negotiated was a great success for Northern Ireland, fully compatible with the Good Friday Agreement. So to be clear, why is this government now abandoning its oven-ready Brexit deal?
Foreign Secretary.
The protocol was agreed in good faith by the Prime Minister, but it has had unintended consequences. And it's the duty of the government to make sure that we restore the balance in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement.
Okay, Longy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I warmly welcome the statement from the Foreign Secretary, and will she agree with me that whilst we have heard many reasoned and good evidence of examples from members opposite as to why the protocol is not working, we've not heard a single example, other than perhaps a veterinary treatment, I think, that shows what may be the pathway forward to solving any of these problems, other than saying that whatever she does and this government does must be wrong, obviously. So will she assure me that the proposed legislation will in fact deal with all of these complex issues and put to bed once and for all the issues that we have in Northern Ireland for the benefit of the people of Northern Ireland as one United Kingdom?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, the provisions in our bill will do just that. And I think we've heard acknowledgement from the party opposite that there are real concerns about the way the Northern Ireland Protocol is operating. But what we need to move to is the solution, which does require the EU to change their mandate and to change the terms in the protocol itself, because otherwise we can't address those customs issues, we can't address those tax issues, and I would urge the party opposite to look at that in more detail.
Gavin Robinson.
Can I sincerely lament that there are some MPs today, particularly from Northern Ireland, who have introduced a level of majoritarianism. That's not going to work in Northern Ireland. That's not how our system operates. But can I offer welcome to the Foreign Secretary's statement today and to the work that the Northern Ireland Secretary has engaged in for some time now. This House is aware of the white paper that was published last summer, aware that the conditions to trigger Article 16 had been met, and are now fully aware of the constitutional imperative for good governance and democracy in Northern Ireland that this is resolved. But can I implore the Foreign Secretary, in recognising that it is urgent, that weeks and weeks for the introduction of legislation, the passage of that legislation isn't enough. We need to see movement now.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, the reason I'm giving the statement to the House today is because we are bringing forward legislation in the coming weeks to address the precise issues that the honourable gentleman mentioned. And he is right. Ultimately, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement is founded on power sharing, on respect for all communities in Northern Ireland, and that is what we are reflecting in our proposed solutions.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement. The path my right honourable friend has set out is exactly the right one. That as there has been 18 months of negotiation so far that has been met with what Lord Trimble describes in his article today as a brick wall of intransigence, whilst a negotiated agreement is indeed the preferable one, the issues thrown up by the protocol in its interpretation by the EU today are throwing up such serious consequences to the Good Friday Agreement and to our economy and to our union. Will she set a deadline by which negotiations must be completed by?
Foreign Secretary. Well, to be clear with my honourable friend, we are bringing forward legislation in the coming weeks, and that legislation will progress through Parliament as normal as legislation does. Now, in parallel to that, if we are able to reach a negotiated solution with the EU, which will require them to change their mandate, then by the time that the bill goes to royal assent, we can put that into the bill. But we will not allow those negotiations to slow down the path of legislation. That is very important because we understand that the situation is urgent. We've already had 18 months of negotiations which haven't yet borne fruit, and therefore we cannot allow any more delay to take place.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I press the Foreign Secretary on why she's laying the ground for a trade war with our largest trading partners, just as the Bank of England is warning of an apocalyptic rise in food prices, because those are the tactics and the threats that she's making? And will she meet with the UK Trade and Business Commission to discuss our recommendations for a way of removing the bulk of checks in the Irish Sea with a veterinary agreement and standards protection? The Honourable Member for Aberava made the same point. She said she wants a wider agreement, but why not start with that veterinary agreement and with standards, unless in fact she's aiming to dilute standards and remove them?
Foreign Secretary. Well, I'm very clear that our proposed solution reduces bureaucracy all round and makes the EU no worse off in that we continue to protect the single market, we continue to supply that commercial data, we'll have strong enforcement mechanisms. I'm very happy to hear the Honourable Lady's ideas in more detail, but the fundamental issue is those customs requirements that are baked into the protocol are creating this bureaucracy, and without changing the protocol, we're not able to deal with that.
Robin Miller.
Honourable friend's statement and her determination to see progress in this. I welcome too the contributions from many members who've made the point that change is necessary. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that in fact we share common goals of economic prosperity for Northern Ireland, of preserving the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and actually the integrity of our respective unions? And does she think that a focus on these goals is the key to getting us through the next months?
Foreign Secretary. My honourable friend makes a very good point. We do share those goals. I know everybody in this House is committed to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. I've heard many across this House express an understanding of the problems that the Northern Ireland Protocol is causing. I think where there is disagreement is how we pursue those goals. And as I've said, I'm open to a negotiated settlement, but it does require changes to the protocol. And what we can't allow is any further delay, which would have a worsening effect on the position in Northern Ireland and undermine further the Belfast Good Friday Agreement.
Vera Hobhouse.
Brexit is already making people poorer. The government is now risking plunging the UK into a trade war with our closest neighbour and biggest trading partner. For farmers in Somerset and Devon, this would be a disaster. The Foreign Secretary, when she was the Trade Secretary, has already sold farmers down the river. So is she prepared to do the same again for farmers across the southwest who are already teetering on the brink?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I don't agree with the Honourable Lady's characterisation as my time as Trade Secretary, where we open new opportunities for British farmers around the world. And I've always believed that the food that Britain produces is so excellent, it is well capable of competing with other offers around the world.
Jack Brereton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does my
my right honourable friend agree that we should send a very clear message to those in Brussels who would wish to see us backslide on Brexit or undermine and break up our precious union, that this will never be acceptable to this government?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I've been very clear that our priority is restoring the balance of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And whilst our preference is to secure a negotiated outcome with the European Union, we cannot delay in taking the action we need to take to restore that balance in the Good Friday Agreement and protect our precious union.
Barry Gardner.
Emergency safeguarding measures are provided with the legal basis under the protocol, but under the protocol they can only be temporary. The problem the Secretary of State has is that there is no basis, legal basis within the protocol for a permanent change. She says that she wants a negotiated settlement, and of course we would all seek to have that. But how is the bill that she proposes to introduce into this House unilaterally going to change the position in international law, which is that she cannot unilaterally abrogate the treaty that she signed?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, as I've said, the bill is legal in international law, and we will be setting out the position in due course.
James Davis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for her statement. Will she comment on the transfer of data within the UK's Trusted Trader scheme to the EU and how that process could be further improved?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, we're already sharing large amounts of data that we collect as part of the Trusted Trader scheme with the EU to give reassurance that trade isn't being diverted from the GB Northern Ireland route into the EU, and we want to build on that with enforcement measures so that those violating the Trusted Trader scheme are not allowed to continue to do so.
Paul Girvan.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Foreign Secretary, I'm just wondering where we would be today if the DUP had have given in and set up an executive. Would we be at this position where we have got a start, I call this a start, to trying to redress some of the problems we have with the Northern Ireland Protocol? And in doing so, I want to just highlight one area. Many people within Northern Ireland see the protocol as the introduction of a surrender act for Northern Ireland to become part of an all-Ireland economy. And that has created its own difficulties. And many people have focused on to do with veterinary medicine and to do with food, but it affects every aspect of our economy. But it's mainly, I'm really worried about the constitutional position and the message that that has given to Northern Ireland. Those who've seen it as a surrender act, I'm telling you today, it is no surrender.
Foreign Secretary.
There are fundamental issues that have been exposed since the protocol came into being that have damaged the East-West relationship for Northern Ireland, which is a key tenet of the Good Friday Agreement. Those issues will have to be fixed, otherwise they will be a running sore.
Alan Brown.
Madam Deputy Speaker, if the Foreign Secretary had some self-awareness, she would realise the argument there were unintended consequences of the protocol and the EU need to change because they're somehow acting in bad faith by upholding the deal that the UK government negotiated. She realised that's a ridiculous argument. But if she has such an obvious customs solution that won't cost companies any more in IT rollout and will actually save companies money in the UK and in Europe and protect the European single market, why doesn't she just publish these proposals just now if they're so obvious and easy to move forward on?
Foreign Secretary.
I've explained the outline of the proposals and I will be publishing more details in due course.
Claire Hanna.
Very much. It's curious that the Foreign Secretary chose to quote polling rather than fresh election results that show a comfortable majority of people support the protocol and an even larger majority reject the idea of holding the institutions to ransom. The Foreign Secretary is misrepresenting our position and the position of the people of Northern Ireland who want the protocol as a protection from Brexit, and while they are happy to see it evolve, they know that there wasn't a whisper about consent or consensus when the party opposite and the party below me were voting gleefully for ever harder versions of Brexit. Where there is unanimity, it is in distrust for the cynical approach of this government, and I ask, when will this government stop using our fragile, shared society for their own malign political needs?
Foreign Secretary.
The Honourable Lady knows that the Belfast Good Friday Agreement is based on the principle of power sharing, and that requires the consent of all communities in Northern Ireland, and that is what we are seeking to achieve with the legislation we're putting forward.
Madam Deputy Speaker, other members have referenced Lord Trimble's article where he says the government must now act on its responsibility to safeguard the future of Northern Ireland and replace this damaging and community-splitting protocol. And with his comments in mind, one really wonders what John Hume would make of the divisive and majoritarian approach of his successor from the member for Foyle. The Foreign Secretary's statement is welcome and correctly identifies some of the fundamental problems with the protocol and the need to act in the absence of agreement with the EU. Given the Foreign Secretary has accepted the need to address these issues urgently, does she understand that good intentions for another day will do nothing to address the urgent problems faced, and we need to have words backed up with actions immediately?
Secretary.
As I've said, we'll be bringing forward legislation in the coming weeks.
Christine Jardine.
Deputy Speaker, I wonder if the Foreign Secretary appreciates the extent of the frustration and anger amongst not just this side of the bench but in the country for the fact that she comes here today and talks about unintended consequences of an agreement which this government signed and were warned would have exactly these consequences. And she talks about protecting our precious union. Does she appreciate that the consequences of a unilateral withdrawal from the Northern Ireland Protocol would have serious implications for that union that she seeks to protect?
Foreign Secretary.
Let me be clear, we're not talking about withdrawing from the protocol, we're not talking about scrapping the protocol. What we are talking about is legislation to fix the specific issues in the protocol that are causing problems in Northern Ireland.
Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's not just about how people in Northern Ireland voted recently. In August 2016, the former DUP First Minister wrote to the UK Government calling for a special position for Northern Ireland, and people supported that. Anyone who has been to Northern Ireland, as I was recently, and issues that were raised here about supermarket goods, realises there are pragmatic issues to be solved. But they need to be solved with the EU. So exactly how does unilateral threats and legislation build the trust and goodwill necessary to get to the best outcome?
Foreign Secretary.
I do believe there is a landing zone. I believe there is a negotiated outcome that can work for the people of Northern Ireland, for the UK and the EU. But that landing zone does require a change in mandate. And we've now had 18 months of discussions with the EU where there has not yet been agreement by the EU to change the protocol. The protocol was never designed to be set in stone. And what we have seen is the way it's operated is not working for the people of Northern Ireland. So, of course, I encourage a pragmatic solution. I encourage more flexibility from the EU. But we cannot allow the situation in Northern Ireland to deteriorate by not taking the actions we need to now to fix the protocol.
Jim Shannon.
Speaker, can I thank the Secretary of State for her statement this morning and for her clear attempts to try and find a way forward, which we all want. Anger is rising in Northern Ireland in relation to the Northern Ireland Protocol. On the radio this morning, Deputy Speaker, the Chair of the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee made some comments. I have notified the honourable member at 10:46 a.m. this morning, so he will know I'm going to mention him. The Northern Ireland Affairs Committee Chair commented this morning that filling out a form to buy something shouldn't make someone less British, which illustrates his woeful misunderstanding of the Unionist position, and further, Madam Deputy Speaker, undermines his ability to act impartially as Chair of the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee.
Absolutely. Here.
Does the Secretary of State agree that this is precisely the reason that tension has been escalating, and would the Secretary of State further understand that this typifies why the Unionist community that we represent have lost faith, and that words cannot restore that faith? What we need to see, which I think the Secretary of State is saying, we need to see concrete legislation and less harmful discourse.
We are very clear that we need to restore the balance of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and we need to ensure that all communities in Northern Ireland are treated with esteem.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As you know, Madam Deputy Speaker, we spent so much time debating the Northern Ireland Protocol that there could not have been a dot or a comma that this government was unaware of. So given that, could the Secretary of State tell us, was the government simply unable to understand the implications of its own protocol deal, or was it when the Prime Minister presented his oven-ready Brexit deal, he did so knowing he would end up deliberately breaking international law? So what are we looking at here, Secretary of State? Is this government stupidity or government duplicity?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, we negotiated the Northern Ireland Protocol in good faith, and I've been negotiating in good faith with Maroš Šefčovič. But what we have seen is real consequences for the people of Northern Ireland, which need to be addressed.
Hal Williams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Under the current Brexit arrangements, freight trade through Holyhead is down 34%, whilst in Ireland, trade north-south is up by 34%, and trade south-north is up by 49%. Does she accept that economic fundamentals such as these argue against her taking precipitate unilateral action on the protocol?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I think the figures that the honourable gentleman has just raised demonstrate there has been trade diversion in Northern Ireland, and they demonstrate that we do need to restore the balance of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement to make sure East-West is treated with equal esteem as North-South.
Thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement. Point of order, Annalise Dodds.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. On a point of order, I would like to humbly beg your advice on a matter of significant importance. On the 25th of February 2019, my honourable friend, the member for Aberavon, wrote to the then chair of the Conservative Party, the Right Honourable Member for Great Yarmouth, expressing genuine concerns regarding issues of sovereignty and national security related to the activities of the then Conservative Party Treasurer, Sir Ehud Schellig. The Right Honourable Member for Great Yarmouth responded that my friend should, and I quote, consider any accusations he was making against an individual carefully so as not to risk libel, with the implication that legal action would be forthcoming should my honourable friend pursue his genuine concerns. Last Thursday, however, an article in the New York Times suggested that my honourable friend was right and that there are genuine questions to answer about whether a donation from Sir Ehud to the Conservative Party complied with UK law, given that it appears to have originated from his father-in-law, Sergei Kopytov, a former senior pro-Kremlin politician in Ukraine and apparent owner of significant assets in Crimea. Additional serious questions arise, Madam Deputy Speaker. Did Sir Ehud host a reception with the Russian ambassador to the UK following the annexation of Crimea? Are assets apparently owned by Mr Kopytov, like, for example, a Mercedes-Benz car, used by individuals involved in the Russian state? Did the bank transfer at issue in the New York Times article originate from a Russian bank? Were sanctioned entities involved? Exactly what current and former links to the Schellig-Kopytov family hold with key actors in the Russian state? And finally, has electoral law been broken, and relatedly, has our national security been compromised? I've written, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the current co-chair of the Conservative Party, the Right Honourable Member for Hartsmere, asking for an apology for my friend for Aberavon, and above all, a response to these very important questions. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, when I've written to him before, indeed 6 times before, I have never received a response. I live in hope for a response this time, but should I not receive one in the coming days, I wonder, Madam Deputy Speaker, what recourse I might have given the gravity of these matters.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her point of order. First of all, I assume that she has notified any right honourable or honourable members that she's named that she has done so. I'm afraid that correspondence between members on a party basis is not a matter for the Chair. I'm sure she knows or will acquaint herself with the many ways of pursuing this substantive point in proceedings, as well as by raising concerns, perhaps with the Electoral Commission, given the content of what she has said. Thank you. Point of order, Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On a point of order, on Wednesday the 27th of April, I asked the Prime Minister at Prime Minister's Questions if he would apologise to bereaved families and care workers in light of the High Court ruling that found the government had broken the law when in 2020 it discharged patients to care homes without testing them for COVID first. In his response, I believe that the Prime Minister inadvertently misled the House by claiming that the thing we did not know in particular was that COVID could be transmitted asymptomatically. This was raised as a point of order by the Right Honourable Member for Bristol West on Thursday the 28th of April. I appreciate, Madam Deputy Speaker, that you are not responsible for the contents of the Prime Minister's speech, but I am sure that none of us want the record to be inaccurate. As such, I was wondering, Madam Deputy Speaker, whether you had received any indication from the Prime Minister that he intends to correct the record, for example, at the start of Prime Minister's Questions tomorrow, and if not, what further avenues might be available to me and other members to ensure that the Prime Minister returns to the House and corrects the record if he chooses not to do so when he appears tomorrow.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her point of order. First of all, I haven't received any notification about anything the Prime Minister might be saying tomorrow. And I should also say that, as she knows and referred herself in her point of order, this matter was raised on the 28th of April, and I'm afraid there is nothing further I can add to the response that was given then. Thank you. Point of order, Dr. Andrew Morrison.
On a point of order, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the 3rd of March, the World Health Organisation's intergovernmental negotiating body opened talks on securing global arrangements under its management of future pandemics. Given the far-ranging implications of such a thing and the fact that on the 1st of August that body will meet again before bringing forward formal proposals, what indication have you had, Madam Deputy Speaker, that a Minister will attend the House to outline the Government's position?
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his Right Honourable Gentleman for his point of order. I have not heard had any indication or know anything about whether the Government wishes to make a statement on this subject, but I'm confident that that ministers on the front bench will have heard the points that he's made, and I'm sure it will be fed back through the appropriate channels. Thank you. Point of order, Danny Kruger.
Today's Daily Mail carries a story that Dignity in Dying, the campaign group that wants to bring assisted suicide to this country, has been boasting to its donors that it can buy a debate in this place. It suggests that for £40,000 it can secure the 100,000 signatures that are required for a petition to get a debate on the floor of the House. Can you advise me, Madam Deputy Speaker, how we can ensure that this bought debate does not take place, and how we can protect the petition system from this kind of abuse?
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his point of order. I should say people are obviously entitled to campaign for support for their point of view, and petitions are a recognised campaigning tool. The point he raises is an important one. It's obviously the Petitions Committee's role to consider petitions for debate, and I would suggest that he may wish to raise that particular matter with them. Thank you. Thank you. We now move on to presentation of bills. Secretary Brandon Lewis. No?
Tomorrow.
Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Bill.
Second reading what day? Thank you. Thank you. Before I move on to the main debate, I would like to remind all members that those who hope to be called in debates must be present for the opening speeches, and they must return to hear winding up speeches at the end. And I would advise that those who've contributed get back in good time to make sure that they don't miss any of the winding up speeches, which has happened on occasions recently and is very discourteous to the front bench if they do not return. I should also say that it is also courteous to remain in the chamber for the majority of the debate and not to disappear for hours on end, so that one can appreciate all the contributions that other colleagues have to make. Each contribution is as important as the other. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Queen's Speech, motion for an address, adjourned debate on question.
Now.
I inform the House that Mr. Speaker has selected Amendment 5 in the name of the Leader of the Opposition, V in the name of the Leader of the Opposition. The question is that an humble address be presented to Her Majesty as on the order paper. I call Shadow Secretary of State Ed Miliband to move Amendment V.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I move the amendment for a windfall tax, standing in the name of my honourable and right honourable friends. Madam Deputy Speaker, the cost of living crisis is the biggest issue facing our country, and that is why we chose it as the subject of today's debate, and I welcome the Chancellor's participation. We should start by being sober about the unprecedented social emergency our country faces. According to a report from the Food Foundation just published, 2 million of our fellow citizens went without food for a whole day in the past month because they could not afford to eat. 7 million families had to skip a meal, and that was true of nearly half of those on universal credit. This is not just about families out of work, but families in work too. This is a social emergency, and it is also a looming economic threat, depriving our economy of the spending power it needs. And the question at the heart of this debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, is whether this gracious speech, this government, and yes, this Chancellor, is up to the challenge this emergency represents. Now, the Chancellor wants us to believe that his measures in response are the best we can do, but they are not by a long shot. The cost of living crisis is driven most of all by what is happening to energy bills. Let's look at the 3 chances he's had in the last 7 months to act on energy bills. Madam Deputy Speaker, it was last August, 9 months ago, that the first energy price rise was announced, a £139 increase in the price cap. So way back then, he knew what was happening. And then in October, he delivered his budget. Wholesale energy prices were rocketing. The warning signals were flashing. But the Chancellor did nothing. Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe you should go back and reread that budget speech, because I think it would make even him wince. It is a model of complacency. He drunk his own Kool-Aid. This is what he told the country back then, and I quote, "Wages are rising, growth up, a government ready and willing to act on inflation. The plan is working." Where are we now, Madam Deputy Speaker? On wages, the Office for Budget Responsibility is this year forecasting the biggest fall in living standards in 45 years. Growth turned negative in March, with the Bank of England suggesting the economy is going to shrink through the winter. And on inflation, we are now set for the highest level of inflation for 40 years. Madam Deputy Speaker, the plan isn't working, it is failing. And he didn't, I'll make some more progress, but I will give way. And he didn't act when he could have done. In February, another chance he had, as the largest energy price rise in our history, 52% was announced. He could have responded, commensurate with the crisis. But what was, he says he did, well, let's look at it. What was his grand offer to the country? £150 council tax discount based on outdated property values, which misses out hundreds of thousands of the poorest families. And of course, I will in a moment, and of course, his £200 buy now, pay later loan scheme. A loan scheme, Madam Deputy Speaker, which he risibly claims isn't a loan, although it has to be paid back, and a scheme that doesn't even come in till October. Madam Deputy Speaker, what are families supposed to do in the meantime while they wait for his loan? It's almost like the Chancellor is so out of touch that he doesn't realise that 10 million families in our country have no savings at all. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
For giving way. The £150 that was be given out by Newcastle under Lyme Council was greatly received on the doorsteps, as was the money given out by Westminster Council. Perhaps he should speak to his council leaders in Barrow, Hyndburn, South Derbyshire, Bassett North, all councils that failed to get that £150 out into people's bank accounts. If he's so concerned about the cost of living, why are his council leaders holding that money in their bank accounts instead of returning it to the people?
Anticipates the later part of my speech. That is the Conservative Party today. They'll blame anyone else and they'll never take responsibility. And Madam Deputy Speaker, he should have been supporting our measures because in his constituency, 11,353 people would get our combination of a VAT cut and the Warm Homes discount of £600. And if he votes against us tonight, he'll have to explain to them why he is denying them the help they need. I give way to the honourable lady.
For giving way, he's making a powerful speech. I wonder if he shares my anger at news this week that the government has underspent its net zero budget by a staggering £250 million at exactly the same time when our constituents are struggling to keep their homes warm and to deal with accelerating fuel poverty.
I agree with the honourable lady. At every step of the way, they've had the chance to act and they haven't. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. The figures for Northern Ireland, very interesting. 241,000, 13% of people in poverty in Northern Ireland, 17% of all children in poverty, 14% of all pensioners in poverty, and 11% of all working age population in poverty. Those figures scare me. Do they scare you?
I think the honourable gentleman is absolutely right. I've been around politics for a long time, as this House knows, but I cannot remember, and nobody in this House can remember, the kind of emergency that we are facing at the moment. Now, his recent spring statement, Madam Deputy Speaker, was the most recent chance for the Chancellor to redeem himself, days before the April energy price rise came into effect. Madam Deputy Speaker, it was apparent to everyone across this House and in the country that what he had offered was woefully inadequate. People were literally pleading with him to do more on energy bills, but he just doubled down on his failure. 3 chances in the last 7 months, none of them equal to the emergency. And I will in a moment. And at every step of the way, the truth about this Chancellor is that he has been in denial, he has been slow to act, and he has been wholly out of touch in his response. I give way to the honourable lady.
That we debate what more we can do, but will he accept that the measures we put forward in terms of the national living wage, in terms of the universal credit, and in terms of the national insurance threshold changes add up to more than what he is suggesting?
No, I don't accept that, and I can tell her there are 8,014 families in her constituency that would benefit from the changes that we are suggesting if she votes for them tonight. Now, let me tell her and the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is very important, what this failure means in reality. The basic level of universal credit this year for a single person over 25 is £334 a month. His measures this April are so feeble that someone on that benefit will be expected to find as much as £50 more a month or more to simply cover the increase in their energy bills. That's leaving aside the soaring costs of food and other goods. It's about 15% of their income. So what are they going to do? They won't be able to afford to pay their bills. They will get deeply into debt, and they will go without food. It's already happening to millions. I met someone in the CAB in my constituency on Friday in similar circumstances. Let me be honest, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would have no idea how I would cope in these circumstances. Would any member of this House? Maybe the Chancellor can tell us what somebody in these circumstances is supposed to do. And Mr. Speaker, if you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Madam Deputy Speaker, if you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer and you can't answer that question, it should tell you something, that you are failing in your duty to the people of this country who most need your help. And of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, what makes him even more culpable is that there is something that could help staring him right in the face, where the case has become unanswerable, where the government has run out of excuses, where oil and gas producers are making billions, a windfall tax. Now, it's so hard to keep track of what the government's position is on this, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I've given up. But I think he said he's prepared to look at it. But honestly, the British people can't afford to wait for him and his dithering anymore, or his hopeless excuses. And I want to go through the hopeless excuses because this is an important argument that this House and this country needs to have. What are their excuses for not doing a windfall tax? Right, first, they said in January that oil and gas companies were, and I quote, struggling, in the words of the Education Secretary, struggling. BP, the highest profits for a decade. Shell, its highest profits ever. The boss of Bernard Looney describing the price hike as a cash machine. And these people say the companies are struggling. Maybe we can do a show of hands. If anyone opposite still believes that the companies are struggling, are they struggling? What's their next excuse? They argue a windfall tax would hurt investment. But it will, he says. Oh, he will, says it from a sedentary position. Right, okay, here we go. But the problem is the companies themselves say this is nonsense. BP's CEO, who I take as more of an authority than the Honourable Gentleman, Bernard Looney, was asked 2 weeks ago which investments he wouldn't proceed with if a windfall tax was levied. And what was his answer? There are none we wouldn't do. Even BP don't buy the Tory arguments against a windfall tax on BP. And the final excuse, I'm going to make some progress. The final excuse, and I do want to come to this because this is important, and maybe I'm anticipating the Chancellor. The final excuse is it's somehow anti-business to levy a windfall tax. Let's dispose of this argument too. And I strongly recommend to honourable members who believe this to read an article which I have here, and I'm happy to put a copy in the Library of the House, and it's by Mr. Erwin Stelzer, long-time confidant of Rupert Murdoch. This is the first time I have quoted him in this House, Madam Deputy Speaker. In an article entitled, a few days ago, "Now is the time for a windfall profits tax," he wrote this: "People who believe in capitalism believe that private sector companies should be rewarded for taking risks, not be rewarded for happening to be around when some disruption drives up prices, producing windfalls." And that is the point. These profits are unearned, unexpected, and the British people are paying for this windfall. These companies are not profiting from decisions they have made, risks they have taken, wealth they have created, but from a global spike in prices to which Britain is badly exposed, exacerbated by Putin's invasion of Ukraine. What is the principle the government is defending here? What is their hill to die on? Is the principle they really wish to defend that oil and gas companies should pocket any profits, however bad the geopolitical instability, that however large the crisis, however gigantic the windfall, taxation must not change? Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a proposition rejected by Margaret Thatcher, Geoffrey Howe, George Osborne, remember him, all of whom levied windfall taxes. And who else do we see supporting a windfall tax today? I have to say it's a pretty big tent, Madam Deputy Speaker. John Allen, the guy who runs Tesco. Sharon White, the woman who runs John Lewis. Lord Brown, the guy who used to run BP. And Lord Haig, the guy who used to run the Conservative Party. The usual lefty suspects. The truth is, they have run out of excuses. And amidst the chaos and confusion about what their position is, I think a massive U-turn is lumbering slowly over the hill. But I say this to the Chancellor: swallow your pride and get on with it. Because every day he delays is another day when the British people are denied the help they need. Millions of families having sleepless nights because the Chancellor won't act. What is he waiting for? He should come to the House, as proposed by my right honourable friend the Shadow Chancellor, with an emergency budget for a windfall tax, getting rid of VAT on energy bills, an increase in the Warm Homes discount to £400, an emergency plan to insulate 2 million homes this year, and a cut in business rates. And their position on the windfall tax, Madam Deputy Speaker, is part of I won't for a moment. And their position on the windfall tax is part of a wider problem with this Chancellor and this government. Just look at the political choices he is making. He leaves non-doms shielding their millions, while millions of families and pensioners face a cut in their incomes. He whacks up taxes on tenants and lets landlords off the hook. He makes young people at work pay more, but those getting money from capital gains pay not a penny extra. Wrong, unfair, unjust, out of touch. That's who he is. Now, of course, I won't give way. Now, of course, being this government, they always try and blame someone else. We heard it earlier on. In just the last few days alone, Madam Deputy Speaker, here is the roll call of people the party opposite are trying to frame. I have to say it's hard to keep track. The Bank of England, civil servants working from home, shamefully, the British people being unable to cook properly, apparently the cause of food banks. Yesterday, a ludicrous suggestion for one of these ministers, people not working enough hours. And the Chancellor of all people, is at it too. Who does he blame for the massive cut to benefits? He blames the IT system. The dude from Silicon Valley. Madam Deputy Speaker, who is he trying to kid? If he had got his act together early enough, of course he could have raised benefits properly. Indeed, the thing I don't get is this. He found it perfectly possible to cut universal credit by £20 in the middle of the year in September. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's not a case of computer says no, it's a case of Chancellor says no. It's not the case of a computer system not being up to it, it's the Chancellor not being up to it. Mr. Speaker, the story of the last few months, crypto has crashed and so has the Chancellor. And how similar they are, the Chancellor and cryptocurrency, came out of nowhere. The value surged, looked like the future, but it's all turned out to be one giant Ponzi scheme. He's just been found out. He's been rumbled, and let's be honest, his colleagues all know it. He's out of touch with what is happening in the country. He's out of ideas when it comes to doing the right thing, and he is out of his depth when it comes to the challenges this country is facing. And the problem, of course, is that today's cost of living crisis doesn't stand alone. It comes on top of a decade of failure, Madam Deputy Speaker. That's why families in our economy are so vulnerable. Growth over the last 12 years averaged just 1.4%, the worst of any government since the Second World War, the worst decade for living standards since the 1920s, according to the IFS. Indeed, wages would have been £7,000 higher on average than they are today if wage growth had matched the rate under the last Labour government. Taxes at the highest level since the 1950s. Public services struggling. Never have so many paid so much for so little. 12 years of Tory economics have failed. And what does he offer in the future? He offers more of the same. Anemic growth, just 1.7%. Squeezed wages as far as the eye can see. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the plan for growth we need. Tackling the cost of living crisis so people have more money in their pockets. An industrial strategy so we have good jobs in the industries of the future. That is what governments all around the world are doing. And we need a plan, Madam Deputy Speaker, to give people proper rights to boost wages at work to make our economy fair. Where is the employment bill promised in 2019 and still not here? They may mouth the words of being on the side of workers, but their actions tell the real story. I'm going to wind up. These are the... okay, I'll give way to him. Okay.
I'm glad he mentioned jobs on the day that we saw unemployment fall to its lowest level, and actually the number of people out of work is now lower than the number of vacancies in the economy. But he's just made an extraordinary number of unfunded spending commitments at the dispatch box, and I just want to take him to the big difference between his side and the Chancellor. I remember the spring statement, and the Shadow Chancellor made a commitment to raise benefits early, and she said it cost no money. It actually cost £24,000 million across the spending period. No sense of how to pay for it. That's Labour. Start, finish and end.
It's good to see he's clambered back on the career bandwagon. I thought he was no longer a loyalist. The truth is, it's actually the Resolution Resolution Foundation that pointed that out, and I can give him the reference. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to wind up. These are the basics of a modern economy, but this government is failing on all of them. No cost of living plan, no growth plan, no plan for rights at work. They haven't learnt the mistakes of the last decade, and they are condemned to repeat them. The truth about this gracious speech is it does not remotely rise to the short or long-term challenges the British people face. But I end by saying this. This House can make a difference tonight. And I say this to his MPs directly. We have all heard from our own constituencies what families are facing. This is an emergency for millions of people. A windfall tax could make a difference. Use this opportunity to tell the Chancellor to act. It is the right thing to do. It's the fair thing to do. The case is unanswerable. And if they do not, they will have to explain to their constituents why they refuse to support the help that could make a difference now. I urge members to vote for our amendment tonight to help tackle the social emergency our country is facing.
The original question was that an humble address be presented to Her Majesty as on the order paper, since when Amendment V has been proposed as on the order paper. The question is that the amendment be made. Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm proud to speak today in support of a Queen's speech that will both ease the cost of living with billions of pounds of support for families and, Madam Deputy Speaker, grow the economy, creating more jobs, more investment and higher wages. Madam Deputy Speaker, the IMF, the OECD and the World Bank have all warned that high inflation is the most acute challenge facing not just the UK, but the global economy. We are not alone in facing these challenges. COVID has disrupted supply chains. Putin's invasion in Ukraine has exacerbated the shock in energy prices. Businesses are facing shortages. The causes, Madam Deputy Speaker, are indeed global, but of course the consequences are being felt here at home. Families up and down the country are being hit hard by the rising prices of fuel, of food and of heating. I cannot say to people that this will be easy. The next few months will be difficult. There is no measure any government can take, no law we can pass that can make these global forces disappear overnight. No honest Chancellor could stand here and promise prices will not rise further, or that the government can cover every extra pound on people's bills. But I will in a second. But to suggest, as we have heard today, that there is no help available, as some have said today, is both misleading, Madam Deputy Speaker, and irresponsible.
The Chancellor for giving way. The other day he said he couldn't increase benefits because of IT problems. At the start of the pandemic, quite rightly, he increased universal credit by £20 a week. Will he do that again?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the honourable gentleman will know, perhaps better than me, given his own experience, that there are multiple different benefits on multiple different systems. And whilst universal credit does have the flexibility of being changed at different times, a policy, by the way, that the party opposite opposed at every step of the way, the remainder of benefits and pensions cannot be uprated mid-year, and he will know that, and I'm sure my right honourable friend will speak to that later. But I'm glad to see that he does support universal credit, and that is one of the things that this government is proud of introducing, that it can respond in the crisis, as it so admirably did. I'm happy to take the honourable gentleman.
Very grateful to the Chancellor. From what he's just said, he's just admitted that he could increase universal credit by £20. So why doesn't he do it?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, because we want to make sure that we get support to everyone in a way that suits them. What we did do last autumn is actually, and we heard about this from the Honourable Gentleman, where he gave a case study on universal credit. What did we do in universal credit? We cut the universal credit taper rate by the biggest amount that had ever been cut. That was the biggest tax cut for people in low incomes that we have seen. And in contrast to the cherry-picked example that we heard from the Honourable Gentleman opposite, what does that mean, Madam Deputy Speaker? What does it mean for a single mother on universal credit working on the national living wage with 2 children renting? It means that that mum is going to be £1,600 a year better off this year. That's what this government is doing, Madam Deputy Speaker. So help is there, and anyone seeking to pretend otherwise is simply causing more worry and more anxiety.
Yeah, happy to give way. I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I do think there's no recognition from the other side of the £22 billion the government put in to help with the cost of living, particularly with the 5p cut in fuel duties. But I just ask my honourable friend that the oil companies are not passing the cuts to the pumps. They don't reduce the price. They take ages to reduce the prices when the international oil price falls. The oil bosses are earning multi-million-pound salaries and getting multi-million-pound bonuses. They are, in essence, in my view, the new oligarchs. And I would urge him not to consider both a windfall tax on the oil companies, which we can then use to cut taxes for the lower paid or cut energy bills, and also introduce a pump watch monitor to make sure that there is fair competition, that consumers get a fair deal at the pumps. But I genuinely recognise all the work that he has done thus far to try and cut the cost of living.
Thank my honourable friend for his advice and support, and I will come on to both of his points momentarily, in fact. But he's right to remind the House that so far we have provided £22 billion of direct support. This is not, Madam Deputy Speaker, a trivial figure. It's £22 billion of support to help families up and down our country at a time of challenge. And we have taken action, as we heard, to cut people's bills, starting with fuel duty, and I commend my honourable friend for his campaigns on this, cut by 5p a litre, worth £100 this year, together with the freeze. Council tax cut by £150. And I think what the honourable gentleman opposite didn't mention, the right honourable gentleman opposite, that £150 of support, which, as we heard from my honourable friend behind, is made a huge difference to families, came faster than any support that the Labour Party was offering in their proposal in size, and it went to a far broader group of people than their proposal, because we did want to support those on middle incomes as well. VAT, which would have worth about, I think, £8 a month at the time, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is £150 in people's bank accounts in April. We also cut the taper rate in universal credit, as I've said, giving an extra £1,000 to the average household. The Warm Homes discount increased to £150. The national living wage, as we heard, increased, giving low-paid workers a pay rise of £1,000. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, we will go further.
I want to come back to what he said earlier in his speech when he spoke about the crisis around about COVID. The government acted quickly. Can I just ask the Chancellor, does he recognise that many of our constituents are in a crisis at the moment? I know he's installing a new swimming pool in his house, but I can tell him that people in Glasgow East are very much struggling and his government needs to do more.
Joining NATO without a nuclear weapon, what's that about?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, this government has always acted to protect this country at times of challenge, as we have done through the past 2 years, and we did continue to do so now. And as we said, £9 billion of support on energy bills announced in February at the same time as the price cap was increased, and it covered 50% of the rise in bills, accepting, being honest with the House, as we discussed at the time, that no government could cover every pound of an increase when we're in a situation with global inflationary forces, and it would be both irresponsible and misleading to pretend to the British public that that was possible. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are going further. In October, a further discount on energy bills worth £200, and in just a few weeks' time, a massive tax cut for workers when the national insurance threshold is increased to £12,500. That is a £6 billion tax cut for working people, the biggest increase in a personal tax threshold ever, and it will mean that everyone in this country can earn £12,500 without paying a penny of income tax or national insurance. And this does mean, in contrast again to what we heard, that 70% of working people will pay less tax this year than they did last year. Taken together, Madam Deputy Speaker, all of those measures I've just mentioned equate to a £22 billion plan to help cut costs for families and help people with the cost of living. And of course, as the situation evolves, our response will also evolve. I have always been clear, we stand ready to do more. And Madam Deputy Speaker, that does bring me to the topic of a windfall tax. Now, unlike the party opposite, we on this side of the House don't believe that windfall taxes are the simple and easy answer to every problem. But we are pragmatic. And what we want to see are energy companies who have made extraordinary profits at a time of acutely elevated prices, investing those profits back into British jobs, growth and energy security. But as I have been clear, and as I have said repeatedly, if that doesn't happen soon and at significant scale, then no option is off the table. Madam Deputy Speaker, global economic forces are indeed hitting the British people hard, and that's why the government is stepping in to help. But ultimately, over the long term, we on this side of the House know that the best way to raise living standards is to grow the economy. And that's why our economic plan and this Queen's speech will create more jobs, more investment and, crucially, higher wages. During the pandemic, we provided billions of support, not just to the economy, but specifically to businesses. Because of schemes like the furlough, we were able to keep millions and millions of people in work, and the success of our plan for jobs is clear. As we heard from my honourable friend, unemployment right now is the lowest it has been in almost half a century. Job vacancies, the highest they have ever been. Total pay rising in real terms and over 4% higher than before the pandemic, even adjusted for the inflation that we are seeing. Madam Deputy Speaker, that doesn't happen by accident. It is the result of a responsible Conservative government delivering a stronger economy. An economy which grew faster last year than any of our competitors. And this strong recovery is making a difference to people's finances. Taken together, the combination, I will in a second, the combination of policy measures the government has announced and the growth in the economy offset around half the shock to incomes caused by higher global energy and goods prices. Half of that shock offset by the result of our actions to grow the economy and support people directly. Now, of course, we do need to do more to create further economic growth, and that's why this Queen's speech brings forward measures to do exactly that. I'll take the lady.
Well, gentlemen, for giving way, given that he was just talking about growth in the economy, he will be aware that the Governor of the Bank of England and the Monetary Policy Committee told the Treasury Select Committee yesterday that growth would actually be negative this year in the fourth quarter. Growth is slowing, unemployment is rising and inflation is soaring. Is that not correct?
Yeah. I think the Honourable Lady, I think she said unemployment is rising. No, it just fell this morning to the lowest level in almost half a century. I'll come on to our growth figures in just a second, but we have had a strong recovery and are forecast to continue growing strongly relative to peers as well. But we do need to do more, Madam Deputy Speaker, and that's why the Queen's speech brings forward measures to boost our national infrastructure, to level up, to back financial services, one of our biggest and most successful sectors, employing millions of people right across the country, to cut red tape, to use our new Brexit freedoms to back British businesses, to reform higher education, and to strengthen our energy security. And we on this side of the House know that over the longer term, the best way to create that growth is to have an economy where businesses can invest more, train more, and innovate more.
I'm grateful to the Chancellor for giving way. While he is still considering a windfall tax, I just want to tell him about one constituent of mine who got in touch, who's a 62-year-old woman in Walton. She decided to disconnect from British Gas for fear of a bill coming through the door in a few months' time.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear of the circumstances of an individual concerned. I'd be happy to talk to her directly if that would help. But I hope that he, in his role, can explain to her the support that is in place to help families like her. Whether it's the direct support with her energy bills, whether it's £150, whether it's the fact that her national living wage may well be increased depending on her situation, and indeed, as my honourable friend reminds me, to talk to her local council to access the Household Support Fund, which is there being doubled to £1 billion to provide direct support to those who are most vulnerable. Madam Speaker, I'm now going to make some progress. Our plan is to build that economy of the future, and that's why this autumn we will cut taxes on capital, on people and ideas to drive up growth and support businesses to do so. And while we're talking about growth, we have heard a lot during these debates, and I think the honourable gentleman earlier mentioned it as well, about the labour growth that we experienced between 1997 and 2010. Now, it was obviously a very long time ago that we last had a Labour government, so let me remind the House of the facts. Under the Labour government, the UK's cumulative economic growth was third in the G7. And under this government, in spite of having lived through the worst recession in over 300 years, our cumulative growth is also third in the G7. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, let's also remember that when the opposition last arrived in office, unemployment was 7%. But when they left 13 years later, it was, of course, higher, 8%. New figures, as we've heard this morning, show that the UK's unemployment rate is now less than half of that, the lowest in half a century. But the story also, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the same on the public finances. The deficit in 97, 2% of GDP. By 2010, it was nearly 10%. £1 in every 4 the government spent was borrowed. There was, as we heard, no money left.
Speaker, to what the Chancellor is saying, that also under this Conservative government we introduced the living wage, which has increased wages for the poorest in our country at a higher rate than the last Labour government ever had the courage to do.
Absolutely.
And we now have the lowest unemployment rate for 50 years.
Madam Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. The increase this year in the national living wage worth £1,000 to someone working full-time on the national living wage. That will benefit millions of those, particularly on the low income. That is our priority and that is our values. But that approach to borrowing that I described, Madam Deputy Speaker, is not the approach of this responsible Conservative government. Today, despite having spent hundreds of billions through the pandemic, providing the highest sustained level of public sector investment in decades and investing record amounts in public services like the NHS, this government is on track to have borrowing low and debt falling again. That is our record, Madam Deputy Speaker: robust growth, more jobs and being responsible with the country's finances. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me close with one final point. History reminds us that at times like now, when we face severe supply problems, an unconstrained fiscal stimulus risks making the problem worse. Prices pushed up still further, expectations of higher inflation becoming ingrained, a vicious cycle leading inexorably to even higher interest rates and more pain for tens of millions of mortgage holders and small businesses. Make no mistake, simply trying to borrow and spend our way out of this situation is the wrong approach. And those paying the highest price would be the poorest in our society. Instead, on this side of the House, we are taking a careful, deliberate approach. We will act to cut costs for those people, without making the situation worse. We will continue to back people who work hard, as we always have, and we will do more to support the most vulnerable. And unlike others, we will not simply borrow our way out. So yes, we are helping families by cutting their costs, and it is irresponsible to suggest otherwise, but that support will always be part of a broader plan that will grow the economy, encourage investment, and create more high-skilled, high-wage jobs, all built on the foundation of strong public finances. That, Madam Deputy Speaker, is our economic plan. We are providing £22 billion of support to help families with the cost of living. We are creating more jobs, more investment and higher wages. That is what this Queen's speech is all about, and I commend it to the House.
Before we move on, I should say that there are obviously a lot of colleagues wishing to get in, so there will be a 5-minute time limit on backbench speeches. SNP spokesperson Alan Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to say it's a pleasure to follow the Chancellor, but we've just heard 16 minutes more of platitudes and no new ideas. Now, some of the things the Chancellor said, he said people on each side of the benches are causing people more worry. Well, I say to the Chancellor, what's causing people worry is not having enough money in their pockets to pay their bills. It's nothing to do with what we say here, it's what they see in reality. Now, he mentioned yet again his £9 billion support package for energy bills. What he doesn't say is only a third of that is money that comes from the Treasury that won't be clawed back. 2/3 of that £9 billion is added to our energy bills and recovered through our bills. So he's making bills higher for other people while at least providing some crumbs of support to the most vulnerable. He mentioned growing the economy while saying, while ducking the issue, the last figures there showed that in March the economy was already starting to contract. And then for good measure, at the end, we heard some bluster about Labour's past record as if to hide the issues. What that does also tell us, by the way, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that Westminster has not been working for a very long time. Now, it is a dereliction of duty for the Chancellor to have no new measures and no new finances associated with the Queen's speech to address this Tory cost of living crisis. The stark reality is, the longer nothing is done, the more people plunge into fuel and food poverty. The April 22 price cap is now 75% higher than just a year ago. Now, National Energy Action estimate that up to 6.5 million households could now get into fuel poverty. That underlines why more action is needed with the Chancellor. And we know the October increase that's coming could see up to 40% of households being fuel poor. Now, previously, National Energy Action estimated there's around 10,000 premature deaths a year arises from fuel poverty. How many more premature deaths are likely to occur with these increasing fuel costs? That's a reality. It's such an impact on people's lives that they die early through living in fuel poverty. So how can any government minister who claims to have compassion stand by and do nothing? Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, even the British Chambers of Commerce have asked for an emergency budget. Companies like Scottish Power are calling for £1,000 of support in their energy bills, and yet the Chancellor previously insisted that taking measures now would be silly. Why is he so out of touch with reality and even what businesses are telling us is required? Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, when we look back to April 2020 and the onset of the COVID crisis, the Government did increase universal credit by £1,040 to help people live. But back then, home energy bills were 75% cheaper. Petrol was 50% cheaper than it is now. We're now dealing with food inflation and general inflation rising to 10%. So if that £20 a week uplift was required to live 2 years ago, surely the Chancellor must recognise with that logic he needs to reinstate that uplift and do so quickly. Even as the Chairman, Tory peer Stuart Rose backs reinstating the additional £20 per week uplift to universal credit, so it really is time for the Chancellor to listen. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, the reality is that people on universal credit are also those more likely to be in prepayment meters who are further penalised with a higher energy tariff. So these are the people that are forced to self-disconnect this winter as they simply will not have the funds to put in the meter. They don't have a dilemma about whether to turn the heating on or not. They don't have the choice. Now, yesterday I was at a meeting with Ewan McCall of the WISE Group. Him and others within the WISE Group deal with people who are in the front line of fuel poverty. In a survey of nearly 300 people in Glasgow, 24% were self-disconnecting or rationing their heating. There are real heart-rending individual stories behind this. People relying on candles, using hot water bottles and just living in misery. Now, the WISE Group, like others, provide fantastic help and turnaround, but they can only do so much. Other groups, as we know, like Trussell Trust, do fantastic with the food banks, and they've confirmed that even more people are reliant on their services. But rather than action, Madam Deputy Speaker, we now also have had the bizarre admission from the B Secretary that their nuclear power policy is actually going to increase our energy bills. It's economic madness, and unfortunately it's madness cheered on and encouraged by Labour. But it shouldn't come as a surprise that new nuclear is going to add costs to our bills. An upper estimate of £63 billion for the capital and finance costs for one new nuclear station. It's crazy to proceed when the cost of renewable energy are ever falling. And the so-called small modular reactors, they're neither small nor Northern cheap at circa £2 billion per new station. And Rolls-Royce just don't want a contract for one small modular reactor, they're looking for a contract for 12 to 15. So what this government should be doing is focusing on providing cheaper dispatchable energy and agree a minimum electricity price for the proposed pump storage hydro scheme at Corrie Glass, the proposed extension at Cruachan Dam. These can be delivered much quicker and at a fraction of the cost of nuclear, and indeed the £1.7 billion the Chancellor's used to buy a stake in Sizewell C would actually pay for Corrie Glass to be built outright. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, one obvious way to reduce bills and emissions is to massively increase energy efficiency measures. The Scottish Government rightly treats this as a national infrastructure programme and spends 4 times more per capita than the UK Government on this. The Green Alliance estimate that retrofitting 11 million homes will actually reduce peak heat demand by 40%. But shamefully, instead of showing increased ambition, UK Government haven't even brought forward the regulations yet for Eco4, when this is a programme that's supposed to start on the 1st of April and is actually part of the £9 billion package that the Chancellor keeps bragging about. So what this government is doing is trapping more children in poverty, who are therefore destined to have less opportunities and less likely to have positive outcomes in life. Child Poverty Action Group estimate there's 4 million children in poverty at the moment, and they say the legacy of this Queen's speech will be even more children into poverty. But yet, Madam Deputy Speaker, at a stroke overnight, the Chancellor could lift 250,000 children out of poverty by scrapping the 2-child limit for universal credit. So when he knows he's got the power at his disposal to take 250,000 children out of poverty overnight, why doesn't he act and scrap the cap? Why aren't the Tory backbenchers calling for the 2-child limit cap to be scrapped altogether? What we do here are demands for tax cuts that we know and the Chancellor's promise are coming, but tax cuts that will disproportionately help the richest and not the poor. Another decision taken by this government is not uprating benefits even close to inflation, a conscious decision, and as others have said, blaming the IT system is just a piece of nonsense, and it's Chancellor hiding behind weak excuses. And there's something far wrong if the government's IT system is so poor they can't press a button to increase to provide a percentage uplift. We have had one new policy announcement, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, and that's making 91,000 civil servants redundant during this crisis. Now, it beggars belief when this government uses the slogan "making work pay" while wanting to sack 91,000 people. And unfortunately, many other people who are working know that work doesn't pay. People that are in work and in poverty, the numbers are increasing, and again, no amount of bluster is going to change that statistic. Now, the government could help by making the living wage the equivalent of the real living wage. That is, at a stroke, would take more people out of poverty, and of course it wouldn't actually cost the government any money. So why don't they do that? Madam Deputy Speaker, in terms of talk about balancing the books, of course another cohort the government's balanced the books on are pensioners. Scrapping the triple lock is costing pensioners over £500 a year during this crisis. Now, ask this to the Chancellor. If inflation is running at 10% when the next uprate assessment is to be undertaken for pensions, is he going to stand by the pledge to reinstate the triple lock? Or will they actually increase pensions by 10% if that's what inflation is telling us? It would be good if we could confirm that. OK, we'll just stare into space. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the topic of pensions also takes us to the millions of WASPI women still awaiting compensation. Now, the recent PHSO report highlighted that and confirmed that it's clear maladministration the way the DWP delivered or failed to deliver the news of the increased pension age for millions of women. So not only will some form of compensation at least be a nod towards justice, it would put money in people's pockets at this time of need. Now, I met 2 representatives from Ayrshire WASPI on Friday, and they highlighted that fair compensation in Ayrshire would be £150 million for 15,000 women. Money that would then be spent locally in services and goods in a real form of levelling up. And even then, much of that money would return to the government in various taxes. Sadly, by the end of this calendar year, over 220,000 women across the UK will have died waiting for justice in the 7 years since the WASPI campaign began. Thousands more women will die waiting unless the DWP and Treasury start sitting down with campaigners to agree now for fair, fast compensation. So again, I put it to the front bench. How acceptable is it to just sit back and let people die instead of providing them the justice and compensation they deserve? Now, returning to the Treasury and helping to pay for support, actually we do agree with Labour on the principle of a windfall tax. However, it shouldn't, Madam Deputy Speaker, just be a cash raid in the North Sea, but rather a wider pandemic profit levy. Tax Justice UK has identified that just 6 companies made an excess profit of £16 billion in the financial year 2021. So clearly a 10% additional levy on them would realise £1.6 billion for the Treasury. A much wider pandemic profit levy of 10% across the board would clearly raise even more money. Now, the honourable member for Doncaster North said that companies shouldn't profit just from being there in terms of circumstances. So in that principle, I would like to think he should agree then that a pandemic profit levy makes more sense, because that's companies that benefited during the COVID situation just by virtue of being there. And that, Madam Deputy Speaker, should also target the companies that made excessive profits through PPE contracts awarded to them directly by that government. If we return to the oil and gas sector, then there's no doubt that things have moved. As Honourable Member for Doncaster said, the BP Chief Executive has said that investment won't be at risk. And if we look at the reality that Shell and BP combined are now on course to reach £40 billion of profits this year, there must be some loose change there for the taking. But it's also interesting, Madam Deputy Speaker, that it's interesting that the Tesco chairman wants a windfall tax for oil and gas, so I'm sure he too will welcome a windfall tax for Tesco and other companies that benefited during the pandemic.
I genuinely thank the honourable member for giving way, and I think it's about 2 or 3 short months since I was welcoming his stance against Labour's calls for a windfall tax. But putting that aside, on his quote of Bernard Looney, is he also aware of Bernard Looney, the Chief Executive of BP, as well as saying that the currently committed investments would not be at risk from a windfall tax? He's also said that future investments could be.
He did. You're just fudging it. At the end of the day, there's so much excess profit here that something needs to be done. We need a serious conversation like this. Interestingly, in front of the Bees Committee, the Chief Executive of Centrica spoke about the record profits they're making, but they pay so much tax in Norway and actually pay much more tax in Norway than the tax take here. And he confirmed that a tax regime can be balanced. He's quite happy paying more if it's a stable regime. So actually we could have a serious debate about a tax regime here that realises more money for the Treasury, especially in this time of need. Now, and that takes us, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the Treasury. The Chancellor himself has generated his own windfall. As our energy bills have nearly doubled, so has the VAT intake to the Treasury. As petrol prices have soared, so has the VAT returns to the Treasury. Indeed, the duty cut he was bragging about is actually long paid for by the extra VAT that was already getting raked in. And as we've heard, now there's a real risk that this duty cut is actually being gouged out by greedy petrol companies and not being passed on to consumers. So again, that's something the Chancellor needs to get a grip of. Oil and gas revenues have increased by £3.5 billion in the last couple of years, and I have a funny feeling that in the autumn statement the Chancellor is going to predict even greater income from oil and gas revenues, so that alone should be getting recirculated and used to support people. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Scottish Government are doing what they can to mitigate the crisis, but we cannot make decisions a normal country can make. The Scottish Government introduced the game-changing child payment, doubling it to £20 per week, and that's going to increase to £25 a week later this year. This could lift 50,000 children out of relative poverty, but cannot have the same positive impact it would otherwise due to Tory cuts. And this crisis demonstrates the lack of real options for Scotland within the current constitutional settlement. We cannot make decisions a normal country can make. It's not in our gift to change VAT and energy bills. Whatever the views are, a windfall tax, we cannot do that. We don't have control over fuel duty or VAT either. We have limited borrowing powers. We're locked into bad decisions by the UK Government in terms of the race for nuclear encouraged by Labour, money in nuclear weapons, taking out the EU and being short-changing funding from the UK Government on that. It's a country we are energy rich, but we've got citizens living in fuel poverty. We exported oil and gas for years, but don't even have an oil and gas fund. It's time for a different direction, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've had 315 years of the so-called most successful union ever, but yet a government whose slogan is level up and they know best. If the union is so successful, we shouldn't need a slogan about levelling up. It's time for independence, time that we're able to make decisions for ourselves.
Chair of the Treasury Select Committee, Mel Stride.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I rise to very much welcome this debate. It does indeed address one of the great challenges of our time, the cost of living. And of course, right at the centre of that, Madam Deputy Speaker, lies the rate of inflation, which many members have referenced in the debate so far. And the responsibility for that, of course, is with the Bank of England. And it seems to me that in very recent times, the bank has come into a good deal of criticism for not having apparently got on top of that rate of inflation. It's currently above 7%. It'll rise to 10% in the autumn before falling back again next year. That's well detached, of course, from its target of 2%. So the question arises, is the Bank of England culpable for having missed that target to the extent that it has been missed? And I wanted to speak today, really, partially at least, in defence of the Bank of England, one of our most important independent institutions in our country. And to make the following observations. The first, as the Chancellor has already pointed out, the level of inflation across the world is elevated. There are some exceptions to that, but most leading economies are facing very high levels of inflation. In fact, the United States, Spain, Germany have higher rates of inflation than we do in the United Kingdom, and our rate is broadly similar to that across the Eurozone. The second point is what one can expect from monetary policy under the current circumstances. And if you look at the main drivers of inflation, those are a war in Ukraine, there are a surge in energy prices, a surge in food prices, there's some of the effects of the unlocking of the economy and its rapid growth and supply chain bottlenecks that developed as a consequence of that. And then, of course, what played out in the labour market as the economy opened up. And very few of those factors, Madam Deputy Speaker, are amenable to being controlled through interest rates and monetary policy. And of course, monetary policy itself, Madam Deputy Speaker, takes time to take effect. If you put interest rates up, it typically takes around a year plus through the transmission mechanism to have an effect on demand and to start to bear down on inflation. So I would say, Madam Deputy Speaker, for probably about 80% of the rise that there has been in inflation above that target of 2%, we should not be holding the Bank of England particularly culpable for that. And those, and some of them have been on my side of the House, who have, as a consequence of this high inflation, been calling into question the independence of the Bank of England, or whether it should remain independent going forward. I think they are misplaced notions, and I think we should defend the Bank of England in that respect very firmly. There is one area, perhaps the other 20% of the growth in inflation, where I think the bank perhaps is at least partially culpable, and that is what has happened in the labour market. The bank was very slow to establish the fact that the market was getting overheated. What appeared to be isolated areas, such as amongst HGV drivers and other pools of labour within the labour market, soon has spilled over into a more general price increase across labour. And the danger here now is a wage price spiral in which we see wages chasing prices and in turn driving up wages still further. And there is a real danger now that we're in a position where future expectations of inflation have become substantially de-anchored from that 2%. And that will be a challenge looking to the more medium and longer term. But overall, Madam Deputy Speaker, I wanted to make this contribution because I think it is extremely important that when it comes to the Bank of England, we have confidence in that institution, imperfect though it is, and even though it is presiding over a situation in which there are very high levels of price increases. I give way to the Honourable.
I'm very grateful to him for giving way, and I agree with him about the independence of the Bank of England. At the Liaison Committee in March, the Right Honourable Gentleman suggested to the Prime Minister there should be a one-off uprating of benefits, given that inflation is so much higher than the 3.1% by which uprating was applied. I agree with him about that, and I wonder if he stands by that suggestion that he made at that meeting.
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman very much indeed for that intervention, and I do indeed stand by that. I still believe that in a relatively fiscally neutral manner, that would not, across the period of the OBR forecast, require a fiscal loosening, it is possible to smooth the way in which benefits are indexed. And it seems to me to be particularly regrettable that these benefits, universal credit for example, as we know, tagged to 3.1% increase going back to what inflation was in September, we're now facing 8, 9, 10+% inflation. There is the possibility of smoothing that out so that on the way up it becomes less painful for people, and some of it's taken back as it all comes out in the wash further on down the line. So I'm very happy to continue to work with the Honourable Gentleman with that in mind. But perhaps that brings me on to other fiscal measures that can be taken in order to ease things for our struggling constituents. We've heard of the windfall tax in great detail today. I would support that, and largely I have to say, although I wouldn't be quite as partisan in the way in which the Right Honourable Gentleman made his case earlier at the dispatch box, I do think the arguments that he has put forward are generally sensible, and I'm very pleased in turn that my right honourable friend the Chancellor has indicated that the door is at least partially open, albeit caveated on the investment performance of the companies concerned. I also think, unlike the opposition, that it's important actually that we look at the size of the civil service, that we do have an ambition to get the civil service back in terms of size to where it was in about 2016, before a number of these different crises struck and we had to gear up in terms of the numbers involved. A total of 3.5 billion would be possible per year if we were to do that, which would be a very useful amount to have indeed. I'm sorry, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've completely run out of time. I had much to say, as I know many others will, but thank you.
DWP Select Committee, Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful and I'm pleased to follow the Right Honourable Gentleman who chairs the Treasury Select Committee. Much of what he said I agree with. Cost of living rises affect everybody. The Work and Pensions Select Committee focuses on families with the lowest incomes who depend on social security, and the prospects for them at the moment are very bleak. The committee argued unanimously, cross-party, against the removal of the £20 per week uplift in universal credit last October. The government went ahead anyway, cutting the main benefit rate to the lowest real terms level for over 30 years. And actually, as a proportion of average earnings, it's lower now than when Lloyd George introduced unemployment benefit in 1911. Benefits are historically at a very low level, and no minister, we've asked, no minister is able to justify that. And since then, now, we've had this massive cost of living surge. Citizens Advice reports that a single unemployed person spent 15% of their benefit on energy bills 2 years ago. It's 25% now, and it's going to be 50% just on energy when the cap goes up again in October. How can people pay their other bills, which are also going up? National Energy Action told the Select Committee that after last month's energy price rises, 6.5 million UK households are in fuel poverty. It's a disaster for families with long-term health problems. Being cold at home makes respiratory and circulatory problems much worse. The gracious speech provided no help at all to people dependent on benefits. At the Liaison Committee, I asked the Prime Minister why the spring statement did nothing. His answer was, and I quote, "We want to support people into work wherever possible." But a large number cannot work. They have to survive as well. Surely government must now respond to the immense pressure on those families. Mike Brewer of the Resolution Foundation pointed out to our committee the obvious problem with benefits going up by 3.1%, as they did last month, when inflation is 8% and rising. He proposed revisiting uprating immediately for universal credit, as the Chancellor has confirmed he could do and as he did at the beginning of the pandemic, and then in October for those benefits needing longer, and there are some, as he's pointed out, to the House. That must surely now be done. Universal credit was raised by £20 per week before. Do it again. And I very much agree with what the Chair of the Treasury Select Committee has just said, reaffirming what he pressed the Prime Minister at the Liaison Committee about the case for an interim uprating. The Prime Minister said he was going to look at it. It's urgent. Crisis highlighted that local housing allowance rates have now been frozen for 2 years in a row. Average rents went up by 8.3% just in the last 3 months of last year. Families on the breadline face an average £372 deficit between local housing allowance and the cheapest rents in their area. In research just published, Lloyds Bank Foundation reports that 44% of universal credit recipients are having money deducted, averaging £78 a month, nearly a fifth of what single over 25s can claim. Deductions for advance repayments, old tax credit overpayments, energy or rent arrears. And the Lloyds Bank Foundation says this is, quote, driving impoverishment and further debt, particularly amongst the most vulnerable. We need major changes, Madam Deputy Speaker, especially in the 5-week wait for a first regular universal credit payment, which forces people to take out an advance. And pensioner poverty is now surging. We know that in 2019-20, 850,000 families entitled to pension credit didn't claim it. We need real vigour behind raising take-up. The department should have a take-up target for pension credit and a plan to deliver it. In 2010-11, DWP trialled automatic payments of pension credit. They should do that again. Madam Deputy Speaker, the least well-off in our society need urgent help. As Sir John Major said yesterday, everyone needs to believe the state cares about them too. There's no time to lose.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There is much to welcome in the Queen's Speech programme, but I want to firstly highlight a very serious concern about clauses 83 and 84 of the Levelling Up Bill, which could massively erode local decision-making on planning. I hope ministers will think again about awarding themselves the power to override local development management policies which provide such important protection against overdevelopment. But the main theme I want to cover today is the broader economic theme and how we ensure we have a sustainable way to help people with the cost of living. And crucial to that is regulatory reform envisaged by legislation such as the Brexit Freedoms Bill, the Financial Services and Markets Bill, and the Data Reform Bill. As inflation returns to the global economy at levels not seen for 30 years, it is imperative that we have a clear long-term economic plan to grow the economy, raise living standards, repair the public finances after COVID, and bring down taxes. This is the best and most sustainable way to help people with rising household bills. And of course, like everyone else in the Chamber, I know how urgent it is that we help people with rising household bills, which is why I very much welcome the Chancellor's £22 billion intervention. Raising the NI threshold is one of the biggest personal tax cuts in decades. Increasing the amount people can earn before benefits are withdrawn has put £1,000 in the pockets of low-income families. And of course, the 5p fuel tax cut can help everyone. But in addition to this, we need a convincing programme to grow our economy out of the traumas being inflicted on us by the global rise in energy prices. That's why regulatory reform in the Queen's Speech is crucial. I was one of the members of the task force on innovation, growth and regulatory reform established by the Prime Minister. Our report set out a substantial list of regulatory improvements to boost the economy and create thousands of well-paid jobs, especially in high-tech sectors like bioscience. This kind of reform only possible because of Brexit is one of the most effective ways to grow our economy. It's the sustainable long-term way to ensure we have the Goldilocks combination of sound public finances, money to fund our public services, and lower taxes. Put simply, supply-side reforms to set enterprise and innovation free are the means by which we can make the numbers add up. We cannot spend our way out of an inflation crisis. We certainly shouldn't borrow our way out of an inflation crisis, but we can grow our way out of this inflation crisis. None of these reforms need to jeopardise safety or consumer protection or the environment. As set out in the Tigger report, we need regulation which is more modern, more flexible, more proportionate and more targeted. New rules which are rooted in our common law tradition, which can be piloted and tested and which can be amended if they turn out to have unintended consequences, so that we deliver the regulatory outcomes and high standards we want, but at a lower cost and with far less of a burden on business and industry. Regaining the right to make our own decisions on regulation is one of the key benefits of leaving the European Union. For 6 years as a member of the European Parliament, I saw at first hand how the EU legislative process works. It's slow, it's cumbersome, it gets so bogged down in political horse trading between countries that it's no wonder that it often produces such poor results. I was one of just a handful of Conservatives to vote 3 times against the first version of the withdrawal agreement. I did that because I didn't want us locked forever in the regulatory orbit of the EU. Now we're free of that gravitational pull. We must use the opportunities it gives us. Otherwise, all those years of Brexit rows and divisions will have been for nothing. Only when we have charted our own course on regulation can we truly say we have got Brexit done. So now is the time to get on and do this, for our whole country too, and that means significant changes to the Northern Ireland Protocol. Now is the time to set out a clear plan for growth, which will deliver high-wage jobs, which will deliver the opportunities and the lower taxes which our constituents want to help them with the cost of living and the inflation crisis that we face in this country and across the global economy. Thank you.
Angela.